If there's a claim filed against a police officer, who investigates it?
Basically, it's internal, and that's the problem that I
Yeah,
have.
exactly.
And
That
I
is the
agree with that.
problem.
I will agree with you.
Yeah.
Because in the same in the military, it's like if there's an issue within a unit, they send an officer from a neighboring unit. It's like that doesn't really fix the problem.
I'm on here to talk about race. Like I talked about it the whole time.
I'm not gonna accuse you of anything, but I'm gonna say, like, when people are trying to talk about race, you are trying to say, like, hey, there are other issues, or there are bigger issues, and then.
But what about men?
So the first topic that we're going to be discussing tonight, which are all, again, protest-centered, is... One second, gotta scroll up. Do you support the protesters? Trying to leave these as open. You can take them anywhere you want. If you want to bring it to aliens, you can bring it to aliens. Don't want it again, but you can do it again if you want. So we're going to start off with Mustache Dom.
Yeah. If you don't support protesting, you don't support the First Amendment.
Okay, well, that was a very short one, but we'll move on to the next one. Brento Box.
Yeah, of course, I support the protesters. I think if there wasn't protest, I don't think there would have been charges filed like they have been. I think part of the reason that we're seeing so much like violence, particularly in these protests, is linked to the fact that everyone is covering their face right now because of COVID, and people respond and they behave a little differently when their faces are covered. So I think that's actually affecting, and that's part of why we're seeing a lot more looting and things like that. But that's just sort of like a kind of a little causal issue on the side.
Okay, next we'll go to VoiceBox.
100% support the protests.
Wonderful intro. Okay, next it will be Prime.
Yes, absolutely. I support the protests. I support the movement. I support the goals of the movement. I think there is interesting discussion or debate to be had as to whether the rioting that's happening along with the protests is reasonable. Is it necessary to even have for the movement to happen? I think that's something that we can definitely talk about, or maybe not here, but some other time. But for especially the peaceful protests, I'm 100% behind the movement.
Full. And last but not least, well, maybe least, MindWaves.
Probably.
I'm messing with you, Rob.
No,
Don't worry.
Rob?
I'm messing with you, Rob. Don't worry.
I was like, wait a second.
We look very similar.
Yeah, of course I support the movement, the protest. Yeah, absolutely. I'm waiting for contention, honestly. That's why I came here. But yeah, yep.
Okay, and Rob.
Yeah, I support the protests, but I differentiate them from the rioters, which there's no justification for whatsoever. I also disagree with what a lot of the protesters' narrative is. I think you have every right to protest. I support any peaceful protest, whether I agree or not. I support being outraged by the murder of George Floyd. I think that the racial angle of it is causing all of us to be divided so that the real establishment that really screws everyone in this country over gets off the hook.
Okay, that was
The racial angle.
Hey, MindWaves, I haven't opened it up yet. Now it's open. If you have anything you want to engage with anybody else, go into it.
Wait, I would just like to know, what do you mean by the racial angle? What do you mean by that, Rob?
What is the protest over? The police hunting and killing unarmed black men for racist reasons, correct?
It's the disproportionate killing of black people by the hands of police officers. Yeah.
That's what I disagree with. I think there's a problem with police brutality in this country that we should look at exactly how we could deal with that through all kinds of means. When Tony Timpa was murdered in a very similar way in 2016, while police laughed as they were killing him, no one cared because it was a white man. When Daniel Shaver was murdered in the worst police shooting I've ever seen, no one cared because it was a white man. And when we cause these divisions and we act like, oh, this is purely rape, but there's no proof whatsoever that George Floyd was murdered for being black. And when we focus on that, I think we lose real solutions and we allow the establishment to get away with these policies.
So what you're doing right now is you're doing the white lives matters narrative, right? You're saying, like, why are we talking about black lives? Like, we never talk about all these white lives that matter as well, which is extremely offensive. And it's counter to the reality of these police killings. Like, black people are 2.5 times more likely than white people to be killed by police officers. officers. This is a black issue. This isn't. Yeah, but while police brutality affects white people and it affects everybody, it disproportionately affects black people, and that's what Black Lives Matter is here to talk about.
Somebody else wanted to jump in on this? They were
please.
Yeah, sure.
Everyone here can admit that, statistically speaking, black people are more inclined to get arrested, pulled over, and murdered by cops. Anybody disagree with that?
Oh.
No. Okay. So yes, it is a racial issue. And as much as we want to say, like, race doesn't mean anything, color doesn't mean anything, and that's why we should go do an all lives protest. Well, the truth of the matter is people of color are being targeted at a higher frequency. And that's why it is 100% okay to say, okay, you know what? Black Lives Matter right fucking now, and we need to change this shit.
If anyone minds,
you can just jump in. You can just jump in whenever.
Okay, yeah, and I appreciate the conversation. First off, everyone here that'll disagree with me, that's totally cool. This is what we should be doing, is having a dialogue. The problem is you look at a data set and say, well, if the data shows that this group of people is targeted more, it must be racism. But we don't have any proof that's the case at all. For example, we know that black men, young black men particularly, are 6% of the population, but they're responsible for around 50% of homicides. I don't think that by ignoring the fact that when police are in communities where they're dealing with the most violent crime, there's going to tend to be more violent interactions. And
yeah, but we're not talking about violent people. We're talking about mostly unarmed black people, right? Like,
how many unarmed black people? How many unarmed black people were shot last year by police?
I don't know, but I can show you statistics that show you. I don't have that number. I can pull it up for you if you want.
It's fine.
But I can show you that like black people and white people, both unarmed, are like black people are more likely to get shot and killed by the police, right?
But again, I believe it's not even racial, it's geographical. For example, where I live in the rural country, black people where I live, they're not likely to be shot by the police when they get pulled over. That's because the police aren't worried that they're in neighborhoods where they're likely to encounter anyone who's violent. So the idea that we're making it, see, the white supremacists want to use the numbers that I was just talking about to somehow show that shows some sort of racial propensity for crime. I don't believe that crap at all. I believe that we've let down these neighborhoods and they've become, because you have systemic poverty in places with high population density, that there's more likely to be violent crime of all sorts. That means there's more likely to be violent altercations with police. And so to just say, well, no, it's all racism. Anytime an unarmed black man shots, racism. That's not true. The problem with focusing on that is, did you see Charlemagne the God was interviewed on Rush Limbaugh the other day? And he said, Rush said, can you tell me what a real world solution we could do to this is? And Charlemagne the God said, dismantle the systems of systemic white supremacy. What does that mean? As we sit here and talk like sophists, meanwhile, young black people are being murdered. 50% of homicide victims in this country are young black people. We need to talk about real solutions, not just say, well, this is racism.
The systems of white supremacy, that can be all kinds of things. That one being the police institutions as they stand, our justice system as it stands, our economic system in the way it treats those who are on the either of a different race, who are minorities or who are on the lower end of the income spectrum. All these things can be classified as tools of white supremacy. So that's one thing. But overall, I think these protests, they're an expression of black rage, without a doubt. Black rage as to the injustices that have been heaped upon us over decades. I hear you when you say that African Americans aren't the only ones who experience police violence. And it's something I've addressed in my stream previously. That's absolutely the case. But the same reforms that'll save black lives will save other lives as well. We can see the police violence in the protests, the thuggish, violent behavior of the police, of the police, right? So if we put into proper reforms that tackle, that protect the least of us, the least powerful of us, that will protect everyone else as well. So yes, the focus of this may be on Black lives, but that doesn't mean other lives don't matter as well. It doesn't mean other lives won't be affected if these reforms are put in place.
I can, if no one else wants to jump in, I can respond to that.
I do.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think though that that there's a disconnect from what a lot of people on the ground are feeling for that, though, because I think a lot of on the ground is that this is purely racial, and the problem is when we say, well, the things that would affect change in the Black community will affect police behavior change in all of poor communities. I don't know if that's the case. For example, we live in a country of over 300 million people. We have over 700,000 law enforcement. Inevitably, there'll be a situation. You could pick any race. You could pick Asian. You could pick man. You could put someone who identifies as genderqueer, something like that. You could take any group. And inevitably, because we have so many people, so many cameras, and so many law enforcement, you'll find footage of law enforcement behaving inappropriate towards that group. If you make the protest based on, or if you make the protest based on something that's not the total truth, what ends up happening is it's never able to be solved. We talk about things like dismantling systemic, like you said, well, there's a bunch of things that is systems of white supremacy, but prove it. Like, for example, I could make an even better case that the data shows that more than the disparity between law enforcement between whites and blacks, there's a disparity between men and women. So if you're a man, you're more likely to be arrested. You're more likely to be attacked by the police. You're more likely to get a longer sentence. All of those things, the discrepancy between men and women is bigger than the discrepancy between blacks and whites. So do we have a systemically misandrous culture? Because police are attacking men at huge clips and shooting unarmed men?
Yes, we do. Actually.
Yes.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, no, the problem is that these are ideas about sex or gender that society holds to be true, that affects how our policies and society is shaped in a number of different ways, just like how society and how we viewed race historically and continuously today has affected the way that we shape policies and the institutions that police us. Yeah, absolutely.
So you admit then when we have like an intersectional movement where, for example, we say that women, that systemic patriarchy is what's wrong with this country, and then they have allies that say yes, and it's also systemically racist. That's a lie. The feminists are wrong. And in fact, it's not a patriarchy, it's a matriarchy, because our law enforcement's killing men at record clips. That's what you're arguing.
If you knew anything about intersectionality.
MindWaves. VoiceBox wants to say something.
All right. Thanks for inviting me,
Dylan.
This is awesome.
You're welcome. Have a nice day. VoiceBox.
So, in addition to what you're saying as far as statistics speaking regarding the way that the criminal justice system targets men, you could still break that up in sort of a racial divide. Obviously, Black and Hispanic men are going to be convicted at a much higher rate than white men, let alone white women. So, even if we were to go off of your statistics to show that men are more likely to get incarcerated or convicted of crime than women, there's still going to be a divide in race in that regard. So, I mean, using just the two genders between men and women in the justice system scenario, it doesn't quite paint the right picture, because you're still going to have the large discrepancy between the races. So if you were to divide the genders and the races, then you'd get a clearer picture as to what's happening there. So let me give you a statistic here. In 2014, African Americans constituted 2.3 million, or 34% of the total population in the correctional population. That's more than 5 times the rate of whites, even though 70% of the country's white. And in terms of sentencing, in 2015, they found about 17 million white people and 4 million African Americans were reported to have used illicit drugs, yet African Americans were convicted 6 times more than white people for the same crime of illicit drug use and possession. So, I mean, you tell me, like, what do you think that says about the convictions and the way that police view usage of drugs based off of your race?
You said it there. If you just focus on one category, you miss the whole picture. So why is it Black Lives Matter instead of Hispanic and Black men's lives matter?
Well, because there is going to be still that discrepancy between the way that white women are treated versus black women or Hispanic women or Asian women. Just in general, there's still always going to be a divide, and there's still going to be disproportionate targeting of minorities compared to white people by our criminal justice system.
But would you agree that for example, would you agree the even more of a percentage than blacks are in prison, there's way more of a percentage of men compared to women? Would you, does anyone dispute that?
No, that's
irrelevant.
Okay, so then why then would we focus on a disparity that is less than the biggest disparity? We focus on
a matter of life and death within the.
No. This is a ridiculous notion, because there can be multiple disparities in the nation that are worth addressing at the same time. We can address the disparity between men and women and how our justice system deals with them, and we can also deal with a large history of systemic racism that puts minorities, people of color, on the back foot. Yeah, absolutely.
But again, no one is addressing the men issue. Instead, we're singular again.
How about you go make your movement about men's matters, right? And get attention and do protests and shit like that, and then maybe it'll enter the conversation, and so that you don't have to go and hijack Black Lives Matters and be like, oh, but what about men's lives? Why are you guys talking about Black lives?
So
that's not the point.
No problem. I agree with what MindWaves said just now. That yes, there are many ways in which different people are discriminated in different ways, right? And they can all operate simultaneously, and no one denies that. So the things that you have pointed out, so many of the things you pointed out, I think are correct, Rob. But this protest today happens to be about Black Lives Matter. That's it, right? Again, it takes nothing away from anything else. And then this whole thing that you brought up previously, and I don't want to mischaracterize your statements, but it seemed to me, from what you were saying, is that the appearance of this protest, right, being racialized or focusing on one particular topic somehow takes away and maybe damages the ability of movement to convince others, right? Because they're saying, well, you're focusing on this one issue, not everything else at the same time. If there are people who won't sign up for the movement, will reject the goals of the movement because everyone isn't on, because everyone doesn't happen to be included at the same time, they were never going to be our allies. I don't want to have to tiptoe around other people's feelings like that. That's not what this movement is about. It's about dealing with these injustices. There's always going to be naysayers, always going to be a caveat, right? This reminds me of how, and this happens all the time in my chat, right? Which you should come in and join.
Sure.
But people will come in and say, well, why don't you deal with black on black violence? Well, first of all, we have been. We've been marching, we've been protesting, we've been dying trying to deal with black on black crime. But the people who just jump into my chat and just say that, they don't give a shit about that. It's simply a rhetorical tool to dismiss the entire movement, right? Yes, we are concerned about that. I know you aren't. But right now we're talking about this particular issue. Tomorrow we can talk about another one. If you want to help, you can join in on the movement. But if not, then stay the fuck out of the way. Not to you though. You're cool.
Well, I do care. I do care about the homicides that occur. In fact, I'll tell you just a real quick story about me. When I ran as a Republican, one of the first things I did was, how do we bring our message to communities that normally don't vote Republican, such as inner city communities, women? You know what they told me? We don't go after low-hanging fruit, or we only go after the low-hanging fruit. And so for me, if I was black and I had to choose between a party and the Democrats that I think haven't done much to help the black community versus a party and the Republicans that literally ignore the black community, I'd probably vote Democrat. So I don't begrudge anyone that feels like that. But I honestly do care about the inner cities. And I think it's a disgrace that our country's ignored the fact that so many homicides occur there. It's outrageous. The idea that you said of, well, we have to make it just about Black Lives Matter because we don't want to tiptoe around these other issues. That's exactly inverse of what you should be doing. If you didn't want to tiptoe about issues and you wanted as many allies as possible, then you would take the central issue and focus on it and unite everyone, which is unjust police force being used sometimes.
But
I said, to be clear, maybe I misstated it, and I apologize if I did, but I mean tiptoe around other people's feelings. The people who may disagree or not, right? Like, this is an expression of rage. This
I got it.
Yeah. hope this protest will hopefully change hearts and minds. That is the goal, but it's also just to call attention, and we can't try to make this protest as inviting and as loving to everyone, right? Because not everyone's going to agree, right? I want as many people as possible to get on our side, but look, people are going to be against us, right? And for all kinds of reasons, right? You brought up some reasons that might be valid to some people, and there might be other reasons that you think are invalid, but people hold those reasons as well. But that's not my concern, right? My concern is to put these issues out there and actually bring attention and make some progress on it.
If it's about police killing unarmed people or police brutality, if that's the central issue, then you would want as many allies as possible. Probably 98% of this country agreed that the murder of George Floyd was heinous. They agreed. They agreed with the peaceful protesters. Now, I'm not blaming the peaceful protesters for this, but the same people that selectively push these racial killings every time someone dies of a different race by a police officer, the same people that push them is the exact same mentality that goes into the people hijacking the peaceful protests that are then, because they feel that they want to usher in a communist or whatever, bring down this president, whatever, they're coming into black communities, not their white communities. They're coming into black communities and burning them down. There would be universal.
What you're saying right now, Rob, is like, well, if you wanted your movement to be successful, you'd stop making it about black people, right? Which is extremely insulting when black people are disproportionately the victims of the police like brutality that we're protesting. That's the whole point of Black Lives Matters.
Right, but the idea, of course, you could say if you want to only focus on people that look a certain way and cops that kill them, that's fine. The question is, I have no problem with that. The question is, are those killings racially motivated? We see no proof of that. Again, I'm not citing the statistic of, for example, the homicides that occur in inner cities in the black community. 6% of the population committing 15% of homicides. Everyone just wants to overlook the fact that, don't you think that if there's that much death and destruction going on, not with black people, I don't think that's the common denominator. It's these inner cities, right? The race. This sort of death and destruction going on there. Of course, police officers going into those communities are going to have more violent interactions. And by the way, a Harvard study in 2016, though I know there have been studies that suggest the opposite, but it's not clear cut. This Harvard study suggests actually unarmed whites are more likely to be shot than unarmed blacks. And the reason that the number seems disproportional is because police officers have more interactions per capita with the black community. So when you're looking at pure interactions per capita, it's actually unarmed white people that were more likely to be shot than unarmed blacks. That was a study from Harvard University.
Of the people that are killed by police like yearly, the black people are more likely, like 1.3 times more likely to be unarmed. So like,
but there's more policing of these communities because there's more violent crime. So if for example, in Chicago,
there's more violent crime because there's a history of over policing these communities, which leads to more people being locked up, which leads to more crime, which leads to more like single family households, right? You can't solve this problem by policing them harder. That only contributes to the problem.
There's no evidence for that whatsoever.
Let's also homicides around any inner city. That's your evidence.
Well, let's also talk about the reason behind crime. So, like, I want, sure, Rob, let's grant your statistic of more violent crime being done in inner city communities, especially by minority populations. Well, guess what? These minority populations are going to be involved in more crime when there is a huge discrepancy in poverty as well. White people, on average, being vastly more wealthy than black communities or Hispanic communities. Like it's ridiculous. And of course, these people are going to be more motivated to do crime in order to try to get ahead or get some sort of income, because that's the only way that they know how, when there's also a large discrepancy in the education system where that has failed them in inner city communities as well. I used to live in New York. I know how those schools are. They suck. But I come out here to Washington State, and the schools are immensely more funded. There's lots better books, computers, even better quality of desks and classrooms. Like, it is a systemic thing all around. People do not pay attention to the plight of Black people or other minorities in general when it shows all around us that our entire population is held down in multiple facets, and it all comes from money.
So I want to say that you brought up Rob 2 or 3 murders of I believe white individuals by officers before, and I cry for my white brothers and sisters. I cry for my Hispanic brothers and sisters, my Native American brothers and sisters, who are so often completely forgotten from the conversation. I cry for them all, and I want them. I want them also to not be subject to these indignities, to these brutalities, right? And it's not just the murders, because we're focusing on the murders right now, but that's not the end of it, right? For instance, I just saw a video in which it was during these protests, there was a group of white cops, and they were detaining some protesters. One of them was a Black woman. There's your white cop, you can clearly see him grab the Black woman's breasts, right? She pushes him off of them. And then the other cops swarm and start beating her with billy clubs, right? So it's not just that. There's a myriad of things that happen, and I am sure that happens to our white brothers and sisters as well. But this happens to be, the focus of this happens to be on Black lives, right? But that doesn't mean we're excluding others, and we want to take them along with us, right? We're not devaluing their lives. And something that VoiceBox just said, which makes a lot of sense, is that you wanted to know, what are the white supremacy systems? Well, what he said was the perfect example. How we fund our schools, right? So it's not on its face a racist system to fund schools by property taxes. However, if you happen to be in a poor neighborhood, then you will definitely have a poor school. You will definitely not have a leg up when trying to advance yourself. You'll have lesser outcomes. So as this is something that's come from my chat before, yes, we don't have laws. We don't have Jim Crow laws that specifically say this race, doesn't get these things, right? But it's the application of those laws, how institutions apply their rules to society. That's are tools of white supremacy, and those are things we want to dismantle.
I hate to keep telling. If anyone else wants to jump in, I'm not.
I have a question for you, Rob.
Okay. So just real quick, I do agree, it's about poverty. So why aren't we challenging poverty instead of challenging systemic white supremacy? And what study after study shows is when we focus on race, then you leave out poor people of other groups. When the universal deciding factor is poverty, you have similar situations in poor schools, no matter what color they're dominated by. The reason that things are worse in the inner city is the population density. And when you don't focus on poverty and you make it a racial issue, you know what Chase Bank, who's been charged several times for predatory lending to the African-American community, you know what they have a big sign up outside of their office right now in these communities being looted? Black Lives Matter. Isn't that funny? So they know, they're laughing all the while knowing that poor people are now divided racially instead of coming together and going after the systems of establishment that are keeping everyone poor. And people like Al Sharpton and people like Mitt Romney and people like, whoever at the top levels of the Democrat and Republican Party are laughing all the way to the bank as they rob the wealth of this country and they pit the poor people against them. We literally have people in the name of helping poor Black people going into poor Black communities and burning them down. They're not going into Martha's Vineyard. They're not going into where all of these senators live. They're not going into the neighborhoods where Chase Bank lives. And instead of focusing on, that's the key difference. It's that we have elites in this country that are intentionally robbing people, robbing the middle class, keeping the poor class poor. Instead of focusing on that, we end up with these racial things. And the last thing I'll say real quick is you said that you're not devaluing whites. Everyone here sounds like very good people to me. I have no reason not to believe that. But understand that there are people out there demanding that white people kneel to them. There are people out there saying that I've heard it at these protests, shouting that they want to enact violence on white people. There are people that are putting signs up that says minority-owned businesses. Why are they putting that up? Because they think that they're less likely to have their business burned or looted if it's minority owned. So although everyone here seems very moral, there are people using this to cause racial division. And instead, we could be saying the entire country came together that said the murder of George Floyd was horrible. Let's start to enact policies to affect change. But that instead we took it
wanting to protect like minority owned businesses is not like the entire purpose of doing that is to say, hey, protesters, like, you do not want to harm this business because that goes counter to your movement, right?
Exactly.
I don't other people's businesses who are not minorities, though. That's implicit,
right? Well, yeah,
right.
But that's the thing, is any community owned business is purposely being protected because they don't want to be targeting community owned businesses.
It's not community owned, it's minority owned.
Right. No, well, we're talking about minority communities, so I mean,
sure, I know, but I'm just saying, I'm not saying that like that. I'm just saying that like there is a specific racial bias in saying like they're saying like black-owned businesses, right? And that's saying like, okay, don't break that one. It's like, okay, well, that is implicitly racist, as in to apply break other businesses that are not black-owned.
Exactly.
And this is purely speaking to people who are rioting or looting and burning down buildings, right? So they don't give a fuck anyway. We're not even really, the conversation is not necessarily focused on those people. Like, those are people who are causing violence, period. So,
but you give cover to that violence and you give cover to racial extremists when you make the issue about race, when instead we could have made it about all police brutality, all people in poverty that are being screwed over. And I turned the question real quick. If they said that solving the community issues with blacks would solve the policing issues with everyone else, well, wouldn't solving the issues, if we start on the idea of solve them for everyone, wouldn't that also solve it for the minority community?
Not always. Okay, listen.
Wait, hold up.
You know why Henry Ford?
Good.
Do you know why Henry Ford was ranked one of the best innovators of business?
No.
He really did well with the assembly line. You focus on one big area and everything gets better. So would you say focusing on this, and this issue all at the same time is going to accomplish stuff, or having one solid issue right now and focusing on that to make everything else better, where they also, which by the way, do protest when white people get killed by cops? I have seen Black Lives Matter a lot in my area. I live 20, 30 minutes away from Oakland. I go to Oakland a lot, and I've seen Black Lives Matter protest every time some really shitty stuff happens. And they have definitely helped white people too. It's not we're only here for black people. They do a lot. And what you're kind of saying is taking away from the entire meaning of Black Lives Matter.
Rob, it's like my whole thing is like, what movement could you not criticize by saying that the issue is bigger and you're not addressing other issues? Is there any movement that anyone could ever make about anything that could not be like, hey, you're ignoring this issue and that's big too?
Yes, it would be any issue that you're talking about this issue and not differentiating based on characteristics such as race and gender. For example, I could say I'm protesting poverty, the treatment of those that are poor. Instead, what you were talking about, Mustache Tom, which is it cool if I just call you all by the names that's showing up? I don't mean any offense. I'm new, so I don't know everyone.
To clarify, I am not the Coop Show. I'm just leeching off of him because I don't want to pay for an account. I'm Dylan.
Oh,
okay.
You can change your name, right?
You can change your name if you click.
It's not my account. I can't change it if I don't even own it.
It just changes it for now.
Oh shit! How do you do that?
You just click on the name.
But
yeah,
is
that easy? Damn.
But Dom, what you're saying about the assembly line approach, like that's exactly it. But the reason the assembly line worked was because you had the big picture in mind. We want to build a car. What's happening is we have the big picture. We want to end poverty or we want to end police brutality. But instead, we're hyper focusing on issues that are specific about that. So it would be like in the assembly line saying, we're just going to put all of our attention into this one part. But then when you do that, you implicitly mean that the attention to the other parts aren't getting the area of attention they deserve. It's not the best analogy. I understand how. I'm not saying your analogy wasn't the best. My response to that analogy isn't the best. But what I'm saying is we are focusing on the specific issue when we focus on police brutality. Look, we could argue like philosophically and bring up analogies all we want. Does anyone disagree with this? there seemed to be a mass understanding of people that were condemning the murder of George Floyd and people wanting that person brought to justice. And now, because people have hijacked this protest, whether it be for political or racist reasons, now there are a lot of people, instead of just focusing on the murder of George Floyd, are focusing on other things like riots, are focusing things on the need for self-defense and things like that. If the issue was to get justice for Floyd, if the issue was to end police brutality, why would we needlessly cause this division by making it about something else?
Well, first off, George Floyd was the final straw in a list of many killings of unarmed Black people over the past decade. It wasn't just about justice for George Floyd. I mean, yes, of course it is about justice for George Floyd, because he is the person who was most recently murdered by a cop. However, that doesn't mean that only applies to George Floyd, and once these guys are prosecuted and convicted of their crime, okay, everybody, yay, we did it, go home now. No, this is more than that. Things will never be the same, because we've opened our eyes to the fact that not only are we seeing a giant problem with systemic racism as a whole against Black people and other minorities, we are seeing, in particular, our law enforcement disproportionately targeting these communities. And I understand what you're saying, that there are statistics that prove that white people are targets of this as well, and I agree. But that doesn't mean that they can't be part of that bigger movement where we want to end and just completely dismantle systemic racism. Because as you mentioned before, poverty, yes, I mean, there is, of course, the problem of the elites pitting us against one another. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge the statistics show that even poverty disproportionately affects minority communities. So until we have that sort of equity in these communities, in order to be able to say that poverty is equal amongst all races and equal amongst all genders and so on and so forth, there's not going to be any discussions about that, because the fact of the matter is, this is what we're focusing on right now, because this is what's happening right now.
So I also want to add one thing. Going back to something Rob said previously about how certain protesters have been saying some outrageous things, and I'll take your word for it that some Black Lives protesters have been demanding white people to kneel in front of them, which sounds like a hardcore troll, whether it's true or not, but it sounds like a hardcore troll. But okay, let's say that's absolutely completely true. Okay, well, that's crazy. I think we can all agree that's nonsense, and that doesn't actually accomplish anything. And maybe if that's true, then it's just making that person at that moment feel better, but damaging the overall movement in general. Sure. But we can also go back a few weeks and look at the COVID-19 protests where there was a lot of white people showed up at state houses.
With guns.
Very angrily, with guns. Yes, let's not forget with guns, right? Heavily armed, right? And there were people...
cops were shaking their hands, bro.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
cops were shaking their fucking hands, man.
I'm going in a different direction in this and that. I mean, some of them were white supremacists and promoting white supremacist messages at the time, right? Does that mean I can paint everyone there as white supremacists? No, it's a protest. People do stupid shit. They're kooks, right? But that doesn't take away from everything that they were saying. There were some legitimate points to that protest. Like you'll see within liberal media, people painting it as, white people just want to get haircuts again, right? Well, no, that's not completely true. I mean, there are businesses who are falling apart, who are going bankrupt now because they don't have customers, and the federal government in this botched response by the Trump administration has not been providing proper support, right? So they're going out of business. They're saying, hey, we need to reopen. I'm sorry, I know there's a quarantine going on. I mean, some of them actually cared about that. Other ones didn't, trying to keep people safe. But in any case, they're like, I want to stay in the business, and this is my entire livelihood, right? So that's a valid reason for that protest, right? But to then say that, well, I saw white supremacists at that protest, meaning I can invalidate the whole protest, is a mistake.
But no, I certainly wouldn't invalidate. Like, let me be clear. Even if I don't support the overarching narrative of the racial aspect of it. I understand every single person that is outraged by the murder of Floyd. I get that. I stand by any protest, even if I would disagree with it. And I'm not saying I disagree with them being outraged at Floyd. So please, I hope I didn't come across that I was unvalidating these people because rioters are taking advantage. I actually support the protesters and think that the rioters are taking advantage of them. But you said about white people with guns. I don't understand why the with guns parts makes it worse. We have a Second Amendment. They were legally carrying guns. There were also, I've seen black shop owners carrying guns.
Fucking tear gassed.
Specifically, so the reason why I'm bringing that up, though, is because they specifically intimidate state legislators to the point, like, for instance, in Michigan, to the point that legislators came in wearing body armor. And then the Republican state legislator, like, it was because it's head by Republicans, they canceled their session, right? Because they were afraid for their lives, right? Yes, they have the right to carry guns. Should they have the right to carry guns in within a state legislature, state house?
State legislature building.
I would say no, right? And apparently, as I understand it, Ronald Reagan put in anti-gun laws in California when you had Black Panthers coming into state houses with guns as well. So yes, they have their Second Amendment rights, but the point I'm bringing up is that this was a clear act of intimidation of the lawmakers.
Can you show me one example of anyone protesting the lockdown that used any violence whatsoever on a person, burned down a vehicle, burned down a police precinct, burned down a shop, killed a security guard, beat shop owners? Is there any example of any of the lockdown protesters doing that?
Well, they didn't have to because the police didn't intimidate and attack them first.
Exactly.
It's an outrageous statement to say that these looters are only responding to the police attacking peaceful. That's outrageous. There's no,
because every single one of these protests were peaceful until police officers provoked them, until they stoked the protesters and turned them violent. So
I don't know about that.
And then the rioting and then the looting happened. Yeah,
that's not true.
And then
you can go watch.
That's not true by what?
By what statement is it true? Like, I mean, that I don't know. That just seems like such a major generalization.
By every account of every one of these protests. What do you mean?
Wait, you get like there was absolutely no violence. There was no one committing any violence, and there was no one going to do any kind of looting or anything or any rioting until the police provoked it. There's always some kind of looting or violence in these types of protests. It's like stretching back to I don't know, just I would say WTO riots in Seattle. I'm speaking about Seattle specifically as because I live there. But there's always agitators, essentially, right? It seems too big of a generalization to be like nothing happened until the police caused it. I mean, I'm not saying that the police don't cause it, or that they were not heavy-handed.
If you talk to the people, at every single one of these protests, if you actually look at what like the folding of like the events at every single one of these protests, yeah, they are organized peacefully. They come together peacefully. They demonstrated peacefully, and then the police show up, provoke them, and then things turn violent. That's how every single one of these go.
That's not true. I can find you video right now.
He has a stream VOD. And you will literally see cops on top of the freeway. Everyone's below. And they're walking around. And next thing you know, he gets fucking hit with a rubber pellet from cops up there. That is inciting violence. You just said that there hasn't been any.
But listen, there could be cops that acted poorly, of course. That doesn't mean that every single one of these riots where it was all peaceful people, and then because the cops did something, they were like, I know, I'm going to beat this shop owner nearly to death because the cop shot a rubber bullet at me. Exactly. That is an absurd lack of agency that you're giving to people.
Just 4 sentences, you went from it's never happened to yes, it could have happened.
No, if you make a claim, not one riot would have happened if cops weren't there. I can show you video after video of black protesters.
I don't know if they would have or not, but I know for a fact that none of these riots happened until after police stoked violence. Yeah,
that's outrageous. I can show you video.
It's outrageous because it doesn't coincide with your narrative that you've been fed from whatever fucking outlets you've gotten it from. But yeah, it's absolutely true.
You let me finish my point. I could show you video after video of black protesters telling people that are smashing store windows in the middle of a peaceful protest, get the hell out of here. Now you're telling me that the peaceful protesters are sitting there and the cops are agitating them, and then someone's like, oh, I'm going to go against the wishes of these peaceful protesters and smash this window and it's the cops' fault. I mean, that makes no sense.
Well, sometimes yes, and let's also talk about. So earlier you alluded to the fact that there are people, agitators that try to hijack the peaceful protests, and the way you alluded to it is that you were implying that it's only Antifa or members of Antifa that do that. Let's talk about how the fact that there are certainly evidence of right-wing activists or militia groups that are also trying to hijack these protests, and even undercover police forces, and in some cases not even undercover police themselves, breaking business buildings or destroying vehicles, let alone all the evidence, of course, of them running into protest groups with their vans or other heinous acts in addition to shooting people with tear gas and rubber bullets. The fact of the matter is that this violence is, if it's done by anyone that's originally part of the peaceful protests, I would say that it's an action that's more or less justified because it's a response to an extreme force and certainly an unconstitutional force by the police. But when it is done by agitators who are trying to hijack the movement or try to paint the protesters as violent, even though they're peaceful, usually it's done by people who are against the protesters in the first place. Like I said, right-wing militia groups or the cops themselves.
First off,
we have evidence of it.
Real quick, when you start to say violence is justified, every single extremist group, right and left and anywhere in between, will start to try to get in and influence that. So of course that happens. The vast majority of the people that you see committing violence are people committing violence either that are apolitical or are from the left and want some sort of political.
The vast majority of people committing violence are the police officers in these protests.
That's
not
true
agitators
whatsoever.
in the police, or not agitators
whatsoever.
amongst the protests. Not
It's
the
not true.
rioters.
You have no.
So they're not shooting them with tear gas and rubber bullets?
If there is a violent,
I could say one thing to you, Rob. Well, specifically talking about the looting, you brought up, right? Like you said, you compared it to the lockdown protests, asking if there was an example of that. Well, I would say that let's not forget that these protesters are in a completely different socioeconomic class than the protesters that were doing the lockdown protests, right? Like these aren't the same groups in the same situation, right? Some of this looting is being done purely out of desperation. Some is just simply opportunistic by opportunistic criminals. We have to acknowledge that, right? But we also can't forget the context as to all this is happening. I mean, we have 40 million plus people out of work, right? Yes, there's going to be a lot of looting by a lot of people because they see an opportunity to feed themselves or to take something that they can sell off later to get some cash in their hands, because there's certainly no support coming from our government, right? And not all these people are going to be able to get back to work anytime soon. Not all these people even can access unemployment.
But Prime, think of the poor TVs and poor Target and AutoZone.
Yeah, the poor shop owner, poor David Korn that was murdered for a TV. Yeah, who cares about that black life, right? And this is absurd. So what? You've just given the rationale for why looting was occurring. Okay, well, it's
the only black lives the only black lives that matter to you, Rob, are the ones that you can take that are victims from these protests and paint as like somehow indicative of the entire movement, so that you can discredit the entirety of Black Lives Matters. Don't sit here and pretend like you give a fuck about Black Lives Matters or Black lives in general, or even that particular shop owner. You're only weaponizing it so that you could fit because it fits your fucking narrative, and you could say, oh look, you guys actually don't care about Black lives because this one shop owner got killed by opportunistic fucks that like were rioting and looting during the fucking protests. It's not indicative of the broader movement at all.
I didn't say that the people murdering were the same as the peaceful protest. You have people on your side that are saying the violence is justified because of the situation that people were in. And secondly, what you're accusing me of is false and exactly as usual, exactly what your side's doing. You don't care about Black lives at all. You only care about the Black lives that you could weaponize to justify things like the riots, which you're justifying, right? Not you personally, but which people are saying, such as VoiceBox, unfortunately. That
the thing is that nobody here is saying that like rioting and looting is what we should engage in. We're all saying that these are. We are all saying that these are behaviors that should be condemned. While they are understandable and rioting does happen during these things, we can look at like Rodney King and the LA riots. This is predictable. We know people do this, right? The problem is that you're trying to twist this in a way so that we don't address the broader issue of Black people being disproportionately the victims of violence by police. That's the problem.
But again, VoiceBox specifically said that you thought that the violence from the people in that community, the protesters, was justified if they become violent.
If the cops become violent, absolutely, because they're the ones who started it. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who came in with tear gas and rubber bullets and batons and shields attacking these people. Like, I'm of the belief that without Malcolm, there would be no MLK. His protests would have been all for naught because they would have just beat them down completely. I think there is some utility to having certain groups fight back against these racist militias, especially law enforcement. I mean, when you look at, for instance, the riots in South Africa during apartheid, and then you look at Nelson Mandela, of course, he was able to get legislation passed to end the apartheid because he's like, you're going to either deal with me or you're going to deal with fucking them. And they're breaking your shit in the streets.
Honestly, I'm glad to have that soundbite. That's fantastic. So we went from, it's about systemic racism. I'm not being rude here. I'm just saying that we're not going to. That's exactly what I'm telling people on the left are saying. That violence is justified. This is okay. That the cops are racist.
Whoa. You think that violence against the police officers is not justified? Like yes. Burning their police cars, like burning their precincts. You think that that's not justifiable in any way?
It's not justifiable unless you're literally being physically attacked at the moment. I don't understand.
Yeah, Black people are being physically attacked right now by police officers. Black people are being the victims of murders by the hands of police officers fucking all the fucking time in America. Yeah, Black people are under attack. I think a little bit of violence, a little bit of pushback, a little bit of fucking like police officers' cars being burned is completely justified. I'm not gonna fucking spill tears over fucking a police officer's car being burned down when Black lives are fucking being shown not to matter because they're lying dead in the streets at the hands of cops. Yeah, I don't give a fuck.
So your argument is that if you feel that a community is being attacked by someone in a different community, then they're justified to use violence. So if I could prove to you the statistics show,
wait. Police officers are not a community. They are not a community. They are an institution.
They don't have agency?
True.
They don't have agency? If they're a group of people targeted for their profession or for their job, I could prove to you, for example, using statistics last year, we had 9 unarmed Black people that were killed by police. By the way, 5 of those, the reports were that they were actually attacking police with things like vehicle. One was a Black woman police officer who was being choked out by a man. We count that as an unarmed death when she shot back. So there are cops right now sitting in precincts saying they're attacking us. We're justified to use violence against them. Now, where are we going to get when everyone starts justifying anytime? By the way, we know, for example, that Black men are 23 times more likely to kill white men than vice versa. Does that mean that white men are justified to say, well, we're being attacked like this, so now we're allowed to attack? Of course not. These sorts of racial grievance leading to suggesting violence is exactly why I said that when we focus on the race, all of a sudden, all sorts of heinous things are justified. Oh, it's okay to beat these people. It's okay to light this on fire. It is not. Hey, John.
One second. We got a new guest. We got John. He just got, I messaged him yesterday about coming on today, and he just got it and wanted to jump in. So, John, I believe I just need to clarify because if you're you are right winger, correct? Would you classify yourself as a right winger or
no? I classify myself independent that has leans right on certain fiscal issues, economic issues, but culturally I'm more center left.
Center left. That's gonna be hard to find you a match, but I gotta get for this topic. Can I just say you're right wing so I can get a left winger in here? I keep it balanced, right and left.
Sure, that's okay. Yeah, awesome. Go ahead. Why not?
Got it. You're far right. You're right of the president.
I wouldn't say far right. No,
you are. You're marching. You're goose stepping across this country. John is goose stepping across the country. We all know.
The rightest one here.
Okay, I'm just kidding with you, John. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. What's up, guys? What's up, Brento? Good to see you again, my man.
Hey, how's it going, John?
Always appreciate your insights. So I'm John. I do I do Twitch streaming. I've been kind of AWOL for the last few weeks. We've been doing some business stuff in real life. And the way I stand politically, first I want to say thank you for having me on the panel. I always love getting to share and participate in different perspectives and hear people's different sides of the aisle here. But for me, I was a right winger. I was diehard conservative Republican, and then got introduced to Milton Friedman and started watching a lot of his economic talks. I started watching a lot of what Austin Peterson had to say. He was a libertarian presidential candidate for, I think, back in 2016. And then started opening my mind to different perspectives in regards to the separation of church and state, true freedom, freedom from a tyrannical government, freedom from a big government. And then I started kind of opening my eyes to the right and how they claim like movements such as Turning Point or for small government, yet every time I look, they're promoting more big government outreach. So I kind of pulled away from that. I went more libertarian, but the problem with libertarianism is that we don't even know what the hell we are anymore. It's just a lot of, you're not a libertarian. That's accusation. So for me, it's just the way I see it is I call it issue by issue and just try and keep an open mind and just call it like I see it, man.
Wonderful. If you guys want to keep going on, I forget the exact discussion we're having. Basically, we're still on the topic. We got about 5 more minutes left in this.
Justification of violence.
Self-defense.
So something that Rob had said previously is that these protesters aren't attacking Martha's Vineyard or attacking the neighborhoods where the bankers of Chase live, right? Okay, great. So I'm curious as to do you honestly think there is a valid target for rioting? And this is not maybe just for you, maybe for everyone. But like when in Minneapolis, when they burned down that police department, police precinct, is that a valid target of violence, of rioting? Because that is the target. I mean, those are the people who are causing the problem. At least they're one group that's causing these issues, right? So would that be a valid target?
No, there is no valid target for rioting. None.
Does anyone else have a different opinion on that? I'm just curious, honestly, what you guys think.
I don't feel it was valid to burn down the police station, but I recognize the anger over the murder, and but no, I think because I think the burn down of the police station led to essentially like the burning down of the rest of most of the city. Not the most of the city. I shouldn't say that. It's much too far. I can't say that. But yeah, the rest of the arson. But then again, the police should not have abandoned the police station.
Right.
I think they feared for their lives in that sense. They abandoned. I think that essentially let that occur.
All right. So should they do it? No. Do I feel bad that they did it? Fuck no. Like they're as Brento said, they were the ones who were the agitators. They started it all in the eyes of the people that were protesting and were involved. So I mean, what more do you say to that? Like this is the language of the unheard. Even MLK said it, and everyone wants to talk about how his kids they want to white splain. You have white people replying to MLK the Third, talking about how MLK Jr. actually said this, when it's just like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's his dad. Of course he's gonna know what his own father was saying in regards to situations such as these, like rioting or just protesting in general.
Okay, now I'm actually, we just went through about an hour and actually an extra 10 minutes on this topic, so we're going to move on to the next one. Cool. The next topic is, one second, let me bring it up, is, now it's based off the first topic, we're moving on to the next one, but it's still connected. Is there a problem with policing in this country, and if so, what are the problems? I'm going to open it up with Prime.
Oh, yes. Are there problems with policing in this country? Absolutely. Got a list here of some things. One thing is the fact that the police can operate with almost complete impunity, right? There's a doctrine within U.S. case law called qualified immunity, in which elected officials acting within their duties, right? The idea is that if they do something wrong, right, they're trying to honestly perform their duties, and they do something wrong, something illegal that they may not have known or whatever, that they have immunity on that, right? It's basically giving them the benefit of the doubt. However, and the only way you can prosecute them is specifically is if there's case law about that. So if a cop, beats a person in a specific place, like with a specific weapon, right? Like if there's not a specific case law against it, you can't prosecute them. Basically, it's been used as a get out of jail free card for cops. And again, and this case law, it has to be within your jurisdiction specifically, right? So there's all kinds of way in which it limits the ability to tackle police reform, right? Like that's a big problem, having complete impunity with police officers. And more broadly, this is a very broad statement because I know I have a very limited amount of time, is that cops look at minority communities and people of lower economic skills, no matter what their color, as valid targets for their aggression. So we have to change the way the undesirables of our society are treated in general across the board.
Okay. Next, we're going to have Mustache Dom.
Can you repeat the question for me really quick?
One second, I gotta go find it again. Everybody's DMing me. 1 second.
I have it here. Is there a problem with policing in this country? If so, what are the problems?
Oh, 100,000%. To be quite honest, I can't tell the difference between what our police are doing in our streets right now and what Hong Kong was doing. The way they are treating American citizens is fucking deplorable, and anybody who disagrees with that, I really just don't understand.
How the boots taste, right?
Okay, next we're gonna have VoiceBox.
Absolutely. There is 100% a problem with policing in this country. I too have a small list. I'll just go over it very briefly. Police in general, as of late, don't protect and serve the general public or their communities. They only serve to promote their common interests and goals, such as being able to attack and murder unarmed civilians with impunity under the guise of fear, falsifying evidence to further their motives, violating Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights, especially of blacks and other minorities, committing larceny under the guise of civil asset forfeiture. All of these reasons and more show a blatant disregard for our Constitution, the rights of Americans as through federal and state law, and just an overall lack of humility or a lack of human decency. These guys fucking suck.
Okay, next we're gonna have Brento Box.
There's got to be problems with policing
in
the U.S.
First time watching your stream,
and
found you thanks to Daddy Vosh.
All the videos
Keep
that we're
up the good
seeing
work.
with what are absolutely like uses of excessive force or just all out like instigation or police violence, like expose a lot of this. And I think the primary problem is that a lot of police, like through the protection of like fraternity, are not held accountable when these types of things happen. And it's because of that we're getting these kinds of reactions. It's like I said in my opening statement, which is basically, it's like without the protests, I actually don't know if, I don't know the officer's name, but the man who knelt on George Floyd's neck would be charged with anything. Like I've come to understand that over like maybe since I've been aware of the problem, that he probably wouldn't have been charged with anything. They probably would have said there was some sort of extenuating circumstances. So in that sense, the protests have achieved, well, I don't know if what they necessarily like meant to do, but certainly something. There of course are problems with police accountability in the U.S. along with some other issues.
Okay, next we have actually John.
Is there a problem? Yes, but there's also problems in other aspects of American culture as well. And that's not deflecting away to the fact that we do have issues in the police force. Number one, let's address training. Let's address recruitment. Let's address all of these issues. In the military, we go through extensive training. In the police force, not so much. And then we're talking about recurrent training. This does play a key role. Now, here's the thing. we're seeing an uptick in these police issues. We're seeing the NYPD video that's going viral right now of them pushing the 75-year-old man. We're seeing a lot of this. Well, naturally, we're going to see more of these issues. Now, whether or not I agree with what they did, I'm just bringing this to light. We're going to see an increase in a lot of these issues because more people are growing violent. Police have to respond accordingly. So naturally, they're not always going to get it right. And I'm not justifying that, but that's explaining why we're seeing an uptick right now in police brutality. Going back to George Floyd, I think the media got it twisted. I didn't see one issue of that being a race-related incident. I saw it being an issue of police brutality, and we have to be willing to differentiate between the two because this has ignited a race war. Maybe it was a race war that needed to happen in order to purge ourselves of poisonous, toxic thinking and understand that maybe, and it pains me to say this, and I'm still, the jury's still out in my mind on this one, maybe Kaepernick was right. Maybe not in the way he did it. And again, this is coming from a fellow old Republican. Maybe there was something to this, but the one thing I cannot do, that I will not do, is generalize an entire group of people, such as the police force, and say they're all bad. Just if we go by that train of thought, it's a very dishonest one. Then, therefore, all black people are violent. All white people can't dance. All Hispanics love freaking lowrider El Caminos. It's not fair. It's intellectually dishonest. So what we need to pull away from is lazy intellectual thinking. And instead of demonizing the entire force, start identifying the individuals within it all the way to the top. Now, I'll end it with this, and this blew my mind. I don't know if y'all saw this today. I am not a Shaun King fan. I think he is race baiter 101. But he made a tweet today, and he talked about the cities that are seeing the most rise in police brutality are Democrat controlled. Now, it's a very generic statement to make, but we're talking about why police are allowed to get away with some of the things they do. And so it's not just from the bottom. Look at the top. What is the top doing? What is the top saying? And that's where we need to start addressing these issues and kind of try and bridge this divide racially and politically and start asking ourselves as an entire nation saying, what are we doing wrong? And why are we not holding these people accountable? That's just my thoughts on it.
Next is going to be, you know what, I'll just hand it over to MindWaves since he wants to comment on it.
I just don't know how you can say that like maybe Colin Kaepernick was right, but then on like in the previous breath say that like why are we making this about race? Why is this a race issue? Because obviously you don't agree.
John, let's be clear. I forgot to tell you beforehand.
You really did, though. Let's not.
I just want to make it clear to everybody who's new. Everybody gets 30 seconds intro. Nobody can interrupt each other. Then you can engage. I just want to make it short.
My bad.
Okay. MindWaves.
Yeah. It is a race issue, though. While I agree that there is a broader issue with police brutality, police training, etc., like it disproportionately affects Black people, and that is a problem. That is a problem worth pointing out specifically. And you kind of like made like this argument that like sort of stereotyping like Hispanic people or Black people or white people, is that all the same as like saying that like all cops are bad or something like that? Which like, hey, I'm not one to like spout like ACAB rhetoric, but even you yourself agreed that, hey, like there's a problem with these institutions that is making these police officers act this way. I think it's fair to say that like, even if you go into the police, like with the most, like the best of intentions, even if you really do want to like, you know, protect and serve your community, once you enter in that training and once you're spat out the other end, you're likely to not be able to or no longer are motivated to like have those same goals, right? Like you're motivated in a lot of ways to act against the interests of the people that you previously would have like said that you wanted to protect it, etc. So yeah.
Next I'll hand it over to Rob.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with what, particularly with John said. I wish you were here in the last segment. But no, even what a lot of you said, VoiceBox, you're absolutely right. Civil asset forfeiture, unbelievable. I can't believe they get away with this. There's also the war on drugs that I think is a massive problem that we need to deal with. Too close of relationships with prosecutors, so you end up with things like withholding exculpatory evidence and things like that happens a lot. I think that's a travesty. I do think that the issue of training is an important issue, that we need better training. For example, my job is I work in home healthcare with people with developmental disabilities. Oftentimes someone with autism might have what we call an incident and act in a way that's not normal to a normal person. If the police have to get involved, they're not trained in how to deal with that. And so oftentimes they're approaching that as if, oh, if this person was a criminal, how would I deal with it? So yeah, I agree with the issue of training. However, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We talk about how these institutions are wrong. They are necessary. We need to have a law enforcement institution, and every position of power inevitably will have some sort of corruption. It's our job to continually hold them accountable. I agree with that. Problem is when we go too far with it and then we aren't able to get solutions that are actually workable. So for example, you said you don't see how this is different than Hong Kong. The Hong Kong protesters didn't light any buildings on fire. They did not beat shopkeepers. They did not kill security guards. I'm not saying that all the protesters are doing this, but the violent interactions with police isn't just because they're like, let's crack heads of protesters. It's because they're being attacked. Now, they might unjustly take that out on peaceful protesters. And each and every instance of that we should call out. But then it leads to rhetoric such as VoiceBox were saying, these guys all suck. We talked in the last segment why it's okay to use violence against the cops. Well, John's exactly right. You've just given the excuse for saying that an entire group of people are bad and violence is justified against them. And so now you even see minority police officers that now have to fear for their life because of a mentality that says, because I don't like your institution, which again is necessary, that justifies me using violence against you. And that is terrible.
Okay, and lastly, did I miss anybody else besides Catherine? Catherine? Okay, and you also have time for an intro, so I'll give you a little bit extra time.
Hey, I'm KatherineDominates here on Twitch. I do some art stuff as well as political commentary. I'm left-leaning. I'm Canadian, so I don't strongly identify with any of the American parties specifically. I'd call myself like a further left independent, kind of like Bernie. As for the problems with the police in America, like there's a lot of ones that everyone's already pointed out, but there's a huge problem of perverse incentives in the police force. And people often bring up the fact that like the police are here to protect and serve, but they're not. They're here to uphold laws. There's actually no duty for police officers to protect individual persons from harm, even if they have knowledge that harm is going to occur. So what you actually have is like a large group of people who have special incentives like qualified immunity, where they can get away with things that a civilian can't, like the police are the ones who investigate the police when the police do crimes, which allows people to hide each other's bad doings. They're too close to the prosecutors and choosing what kinds of crimes even get brought to prosecution, as well as the general training that they go through, which is if you feel even slightly in danger, you should defend yourself immediately, and you have no duty to protect the public or the person that you're like engaging with.
Thank you, and I will restate the question one last time in case anybody has forgotten. Is there a problem with policing in this country? If so, what are the problems? It is open to the floor.
So I just want to ask real quick, does everyone agree that police are necessary?
I do.
No.
Yep.
Yeah.
No one disagrees with it.
I might disagree. What do you mean specifically by police? Like, I agree that there should be some group of people who uphold laws.
Well, would it not be that inevitably we would see, if you have the position to uphold laws, inevitably, unless we're extremely vigilant, you'll see that corrupt individuals get in there or corrupt institutional things occur?
I'd say corrupt individuals for sure, but the institutions aren't so much corrupted as they come from like a foundation of being unfair, and we haven't been able to reform them.
Yeah, I think that's inevitable with any time you have people in positions of power in some way over other people. So, for example, the same could be true of politics. The same can be true of clergy. Anytime you have people that are on a position of power, they're enforcing some sort of law or morality, inevitably something will go wrong. So I do see, I think we all agree there's plenty of things we need to fix. But I think one of the dangers we're seeing is going to extreme, and you hear people saying, defund the police. What does that mean? Or, Minneapolis says they're considering disbanding the police and reforming. Rashida Tlaib, for example, is promoting something that says we should get rid of police and replace them with rapid response social workers. I think that would be a disaster for this country, and particularly the communities of color and poor communities that we're focused on.
So this is actually a mischaracterization of what was being proposed. So she wasn't saying that we should get rid of all police. She was saying that like certain functions and duties of police officers should be replaced with other I guess like proposed institutions, right? Like these I forget the name of, what was the name that you used for these workers?
It was rapid response social workers, I believe was the term.
Right, exactly. So like to do things like wellness checks and a number of these other sort of like duties of police officers that doesn't require this unique sort of monopoly on violence and doesn't require these sort of like privileges given to you by a police officer, that could probably be handled by an institution that isn't so far militarized like the police, right?
So yeah, I agree with what MindWaves has said. It's one of the things I listed as a solution. But bringing that up, yeah, so you can reduce funding directly towards the police, and then because we put a lot of funding into police, and we can direct that into different agencies that might have a bigger impact, right? So going off what MindWaves said, for instance, if there is a citizen having a mental health crisis, right? We don't necessarily need an armed response to that crisis. We can have mental health workers respond to that, right? For things like investigations of a murder like that had already taken place. What about having a force that specifically does investigations and then works with, when you have to apprehend a criminal, with people who actually do an armed response? It's simply taking away all these roles that we've heaped upon the police. And that is, to my opinion, is honestly unfair to the police. The police aren't mental health workers, right? They can do their best, but they aren't mental health workers. That's not their focus. Instead, if we narrow their focus of the police to specific, like, for instance, violent crimes, responding to violent crimes, we can refocus on what they need, and then take that funding and put it to places like, for instance, education, or these other proposed agencies that might have a bigger impact. So I think that's a better formulation of the Defund Police program.
Okay, so she was not proposing that you actually get rid of the police department in Minneapolis?
No.
I don't believe so. I didn't hear her comments, but I don't believe so.
I did, and no, she did not. She did not say that we should like completely remove the police department. No.
I think it sounds good in theory, but any type of situation such as that can turn violent in a heartbeat.
Yep.
So somebody goes into that scene of the crime, whatever the case may be, unarmed, and that's not their job, which is rapid training or again, responding to a shooter, whatever the case may be. You just put that team that is unarmed in harm's way. Unless I'm misunderstanding you.
Now, again, refocusing, and like, for instance, like you could still have a SWAT team. There's a mass shooting violence. We're not going to send a social worker to sponsor mass shooting violence. It's specifically tailoring the response to the crisis. Now,
crime doesn't work that way. It easily transitions in a matter of a split second. That dude pulls out a gun, and that unarmed person now is armed and shooting. So what do you do then?
What you said is fair, though, that things can turn around. For instance, let's go back to the mental health crisis, right? You can have a person having a mental health crisis, and then that person may turn extremely violent, right? So what we could do, maybe, these agencies don't have to operate completely discreetly. They can operate together. So in this scenario, you could have mental health workers or this mental health agency go and respond, but also have an armed response, but they follow the lead of the mental health agencies. Like they have jurisdiction because this is their territory. If the person turns violent, well, then it's now the officer's territory. You know what I'm saying?
So then you're still going to have police on the scene.
You can, yes.
Potentially.
Okay.
Potentially. Depending, we're tailoring the situation. We're not saying it's a one-size-fits-all situation, but you're right, things can turn in an instant. So maybe, yes, we need an armed response at the ready, but we could have others who maybe have, like the police have to follow their orders until things actually become violent, require an armed response.
I think John's making the correct point here that kind of a lot of what you said is kind of the status quo. For example, we have homicide investigators. They operate almost completely independently of like the SWAT team or the beat patrol officers. And they are specifically tailored to, like you said, investigating murders that already occurred. I don't see why them being trained in the safe use of a firearm and armed would be a bad thing. I think that that's actually a good thing. If you're sending someone to the scene of a past crime, there's also a chance that they could, you're going to interview a witness and things like that. Why not just have them trained to handle that and be a law enforcement officer rather than having to send armed police with them?
But then you just created another police force.
That's right. So
then what's the point of the tolling cat? I don't understand that. If we're going to arm them, we're going to train them. They just became the police. Right. Do they? I mean, so I'm not seeing I'm not seeing how this is going to be beneficial to anybody. And the whole thing that I think we're also leaving out of this discussion is the human ability for corruption. So whether they're corrupt while wearing a badge or you're corrupt while not wearing a badge, the human element of corruption still exists, and the problem is still going to continue.
Well, that's why oversight is so important. Like, especially what Rob brought up with the church, right? The reason these groups with so much power and no oversight at all becomes so corrupt is that lack of oversight. And so obviously we need to bring civilian oversight over the police.
But wait, no, we do have, hold on. I don't know how things are in Canada. We do have civilian oversight in our police force. It's the city council, it's the governor, it's the mayor. Who do you think these people answer to?
Right.
Wait. If there's a claim filed against a police officer, who investigates it?
Basically, it's internal, and that's the problem that I
exactly.
I agree with that. I will agree with you.
Yeah,
because in the military, it's like if there's an issue within a unit, they send an officer from a neighboring unit. It's like that doesn't really fix the problem because it's the human element of corruptibility. It still plays a huge factor. So when we talk about
there needs to be a third body that is outside of the police force that holds the police accountable for these instances. They should not be the ones investigating themselves. Yeah.
I agree.
Rob and John were saying, I think maybe a better example would be the issue of police officers within schools, right? So there was a push previously to have police officers in schools, right, to keep students safe. And it turns out these were mostly just black schools, but interesting enough. However, we've seen this multiple times that a police officer is trained to handle a situation in a certain way, right? They look at rule violations as possibly law violations, and they often respond in a violent manner. Instead, taking the police out of the situation, taking an armed individual who might be in their mind is trained to maybe use an armed or violent response, instead have a school counselor there to handle that situation. Sometimes they can't handle a situation, so then they call in the police. But as I've seen personally, that if you have these officers in the school, and especially these responses are racialized, right? So it doesn't happen to each student equally. So even if you have a mixed school, the teachers are more likely to call in a cop if they have one available to deal with a black student doing the exact same thing that a white student might have done. So this is what I'm saying. We can have multiple agencies doing different things, and that will hopefully necessitate different responses to situations.
I have to disagree with you on that one, because you want to look at Broward County. You get the cowards of Broward County that were actually trained on reactions just like this, and they were told to stand down. And then there's also the coward who was first on scene, who was a trained police officer that did not go in, and the blood of those students is on his hand, and he is a cop with his badge, and he was trained to do it. So if you're telling me there's still a school counselor is there to, are we talking about like with inter-school issues? Are we talking about possible school shootings?
Not mass shootings, sorry.
That's okay.
Telling the response.
I was like, you threw me on that one. I was like, well, I don't know if I agree with that one. Okay.
Like a fight that breaks out, right?
Mm-hmm.
If an officer responds to this fight, right, between kids, someone's going away with cuffs, right? That happens. We've seen that happen. There's a fight, but like, instead, a counselor or a teacher simply could have responded, broken him up, sent him to detention or whatever, right? But a cop thinks like, well, I'm going to handle this the way I handle things outside, right? We're going to put someone in cuffs, and then they have more contact with the justice system, the judicial system, and they might have a record, which also affects their later life outcomes. So we just want to limit the exposure of people to our armed response teams until that's absolutely necessary.
I think this comes down, I'm not going to pretend to know the statistics that you're talking about in schools, but I think that this is indicative. What I do know more about is when we were talking in general about policing. Again, there seems to be a tendency to say, well, if this occurred, like it's in the inner city. Well, of course, that's where the violence is, right? It's the same way with violent interactions with people. If you're in inner city Chicago, you're more likely to have a violent interaction than if you're in rural Pennsylvania, where I'm at when it comes to police officers. And I think that there's this fundamental philosophical difference that maybe I have with some of the people on this panel, which is, a lot of people seem to think that police or law enforcement being around doesn't create a deterrent. It's what causes the violence. The violence wouldn't occur unless the enforcement was there. And I disagree. I think that we could see, just anecdotally from videos, you could see schools, regardless of race or anything like that, where fights start. And because the police or the teacher's not trained to handle it, it gets out of control. And all of a sudden you have people severely hurt because there wasn't someone there that was trained to handle that and was had the ability to use some sort of force. So I don't know what I think about police officers themselves being. I thought it was more armed security guards that were in these schools, but maybe it is police officers. I don't know.
Yes, and there's videos of this. And I'm sorry, I don't want to monopolize time. I'm sure other people have things to say. I think it's simply that especially again, we've seen that black girls, they're more likely to be suspended, right? To have harsher punishments for the same rule breaking that a white student might do.
Do you have facts? Do you have statistics to back up these claims? Because I haven't heard you quote. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just need to see this.
I don't have them on me.
Okay, because I think we're making generalizations here. Then I need to see stats to back that up, because anybody can come out here and say things like that. I'm going to need to see some proof on that, just so I can know for myself. Now I have to ask you: do you have children?
Myself, no.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else in this panel have children? Okay. I have 2. When it comes to my children attending a school, I want a police officer that's actually trained and equipped to deal with those types of situations versus a counselor that's trained to de-escalate, which I think maybe the officer as well should be trained in that as well. But to sit there and say that I want a school counselor when it comes to the rule of law, because don't forget, even though it happens in school, law still applies. And if a law is broken, if a gun is pulled, if whatever the case may be, it can be taken to court. So there should be somebody there to be accountable as witnesses, as far as serving as a witness in a set trial, whether it be civil, whether it be state, federal, it doesn't matter. So to train a civilian, it's doable, I guess. I see where you're coming from, but I think we're basically saying the same thing. The difference is one's wearing a badge and one is not, but ultimately has the same responsibilities. So I think it comes down to protection. So I'm kind of clueless on this one.
I've never been in a school with a police officer, what do they call them? Resource officers, right? Is what they're referred to as. Yeah. Never felt at all safe with one of those around. Didn't feel at all a bit safe. The problem is that having police forces in schools leads to a sort of school to prison pipeline from a very early age. It ends up with kids having criminal records before they even exit or even receive their diploma, right?
So you're saying the presence of an officer creates that?
It creates the potential for it.
Yeah. So no, what does is so the problem is that what happens is when you have a fight on a school campus, you would just suspend both parties, right? Now with a school resource officer, you suspend both parties, but the resource officer is looking at pressing one of these children with a crime, right? Mm-hmm. And then what that ends up doing is now a child has charges against them, which follows them throughout their entire adult career.
Exactly. Most charges could be. I thought most charges could actually be.
It's a very generic.
I don't want to interrupt anybody, but I definitely don't want to take either side. But I do remember when I was a kid and somebody tried to engage in a fight with me, a resource officer did go up to me and say, "Do you want to charge this person with charges?" And me being a kid is like, maybe. Exactly. What? I didn't really understand it, but he was legitimately asking me like, "Do you have a lawyer to press charges?" I don't fucking know. I was a kid. I just want to throw that out there.
Well, I had a police officer. I had a school resource officer threaten to file me as a sex offender for peeing in an alley during PE. Do we really need police officers like that at our schools? I don't think so.
But listen, the reason
because you had a bad experience, that means that it should be the same way.
No, it's not just me though. This is a pattern of behavior. Is that cops are looking for criminality in schools where it doesn't fit. When you are a hammer, everything looks like a nail to these police officers, right? So then what they're wanting to press charges on children that should not have charges pressed against them.
So you're going up on your own. Go ahead.
So I went to school with a resource officer, full police. My freshman year, I was picked up for possession of a controlled substance with intent to sell. I used to be a bad kid, all that stuff. That was my freshman year of high school. I got into rehabilitation my entire sophomore year. I was gone for 11 months. Went back to school junior year at the same school and senior year. I have not touched a drug since 2010 when I was still in high school. I've had my locker searched my junior and senior year at least 15 times each year. I have never once been around drugs since. That same resource officer went out of his way to harass me. I have been pulled over by that cop 5 different times.
Yep.
Driving.
But
do you live in a small town, Dom? Because
yes,
I have a small town experience that it sounds almost exactly like this, and this is very prevalent in like rural towns.
Big town. I live in the East Bay area.
Mm-hmm.
My city is roughly 70,000 people, but when you compare to the other cities around me, it's a smaller community. What I'm saying is every cop like that in a school? No. There are decent cops out there. But I went to a very wealthy school in a very wealthy area that I've never had to even lock my car and worry if my car was getting broken into. And yet stuff like this still happens. That allows cops to target people. And because we can all admit there are shitty fucking cops who are pieces of shit and who are racist in the department. We can all admit that. It allows young kids to get criminal records for stupid fucking shit. That shouldn't happen.
But
now,
you're
here's
giving,
the problem.
I agree. I deserved it. I had it coming.
Just one thing about this is that John brought up his children, and I want to say that if I had children, which I don't, but if I did, let's please not pretend that my children and your children would be treated in the exact same way, right? I wish that was the case, but that's really the whole point of these protests.
How do you know that? What's your socioeconomic status?
Yeah.
That seems to be more of an influence than
you're also making assumptions about me and where I grew up at and who I am. I think that's a little disingenuous and disrespectful, to tell you the truth.
Threatened, and not just cops. Like, for instance, we see disparities within the health system, within the judicial system. We see, and in all aspects of society, and how blacks are treated. And guess what? If you're saying that racism doesn't exist in our institutions at all,
that's not what anybody is saying. And I also want to go back to the original point where I was accused of saying this wasn't a race issue. What I think MindWave said, it was the actual statement of saying that the George Floyd issue was not a race-related issue. That's not saying the movement now. So if we want to actually be intellectually honest here, let's stop twisting words and making assumptions and creating these false narratives that I've seen continuously like twice here. I not once said this is not a race-related issue as far as the protests. George Floyd, no one proved to me that it was a race-related, it was a police brutality, which also feeds into the point that y'all are trying to make right now, which is the overreach of police brutality and police in general. Or basically what you're saying is an authoritarian state. And I will agree with you. I certainly will agree with you. But I think what we're also not thinking about is the innocent. We're talking about your feelings and, Mustache Dom, it sucks. And I grew up in a small town too. It's the good old boy system. If your family knows the cop, you're getting off scot-free. But I think that we're saying that because the system is flawed, then just destroy the system versus thinking of ways to try and fix the system, ways that we haven't really tried yet, because I think we're so, or at least for a lot of people, it's just that this is the way it is. Let's just let it be. But we're not talking about what about
nobody at all said that though, John. You're the one being dishonest. Nobody here is proposing absolutely like abolishing police. We're talking about systematic reform.
I agree with you.
Maybe not on this podcast, but there are people that are calling for that.
Well, then let's stop arguing with a straw man in the room. I don't know.
So like y'all may continue. You're making references to various things. I'm just saying this is what I see it as. It's like if you're saying that you want to replace a cop with a school counselor, my point is that you're just literally transferring authority to a different person with or without a badge.
That's the way we used to handle things. So, I mean, right? We didn't always have cops in schools.
True, and but that was also a change in culture, though, to where teachers were able to SWAT. And
we have less crime and violence in schools than we did in the 90s. So why are we increasing police presence in schools?
We also have less violent crime in general, I think, in society, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Okay,
why are we
so
over militarizing our police at the same time? Yeah,
I would say
exactly.
the exact
Maybe-
opposite.
honestly,
if it's trending in the correct direction, why are we now advocating for extreme things like defund the police, remove police? If things are trending the right way, why? Again, last year, 9 unarmed blacks were killed by police. Even if we take the incredible leap of faith that all 9 of those shootings were unjustified, and each person that's unjustifiably killed, I hope that anyone who's responsible for that faces the full extent of the law. I really do. But we're making this claim. We're saying, oh, this happened. We've literally justified violence against all police officers. This very podcast, based on the idea that, oh, they're all oppressive, they're all violent, they're all committing crimes against minority communities. And so it becomes, again, I think one of the things too, we're talking about causal relationships. You assume, oh, if a cop's there in school and then there's violence, it proves it's the cop's fault. Well, maybe the cop's there because parents wanted a cop
not at all
there.
what any of us said.
Okay, what they were
Yeah,
saying
I gotta agree
was
with
that
that.
the
It's not justifying
consequences
violence.
of the same violence is going to be more permanent and involve people getting records that will lead them into the jail system, the prison system.
Wouldn't the problem then be, I think that could be a fair point, but then isn't the problem not that the police officer followed the rule of law and charged someone? The problem is we need to reform laws that and maybe make it so there's less permanent punishment if you're stupid as a kid and do something. So make it easier to abolish your record.
We should also get rid of like mandatory minimums and sentencing. Yeah.
That's type of stuff. That's a conversation I think we could have. And instead of saying, well, this happened, so get rid of police in these areas. I mean, that seems an extreme reaction. And look, let's just be honest. I understand that people want to like overlook this, but there is extreme violence in a lot of these schools. And there is a necessity to have some sort of police officer there. That's just the truth of it. And to act like, well, the place would all be roses and sunshine if the cop wasn't there. That's just not true. And if your kid was harmed by violence, you would say, I wish someone was there. That doesn't mean there aren't going to be terrible police. I've had experiences in rural Pennsylvania with bad cops, but I'm not going to advocate like, well, that means cops shouldn't have been in the area where I was. Like, it just get rid of the bad cops. You know?
If your kids are harmed by violence, you're going to say, oh, I wish a cop was there. But if your kid ends up getting harmed by a cop, you're going to say, hey, I wish cops weren't there. Right? Like, this is just anecdotal stuff. You have to look
I'm speaking to something that it's absolutely stupid, right? But like, no, okay, it's not absolutely stupid, but ideally a school is a place where a cop should not be necessary. Right. And if police are necessary in schools, there is perhaps a bigger issue going on than a police officer can solve. Right?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I guess now you say, what's the solution? Fuck, I don't know. But
I
mean, like, obviously it's going to create potential problems, like you guys are saying, with records, creating records for students where ideally there would be a way to solve it with whatever's going on between students that is not going to ruin their future. Right?
Why not let community decide? You want a solution? Let the local community decide. So if you have inner city Chicago where there's a lot of crime in schools such as that, let the community come together and put it to a vote whether or not they want cops in that. Or if you have rural Pennsylvania, you got towns up in Wisconsin, you got deep South Texas, and there's not a lot of crime, and they don't want cops there, let them vote. Let the city decide, let the community decide. Versus one generic saying this is how it has to be for everyone. Let the community.
And like, just to give you an example real quick, Dom, I'm against the war on drugs. So the fact that all of the charges that we're talking about here, it's easy to blame the officer because they're the one who did the arrest, but they're following a system that says this is a crime. I don't care
about him arresting me. What I care is there was no fucking reason to get my locker searched over 30 times in 2 years.
It's because you had a beard.
I think it was.
You know, you guys, you're right. It's outrageous.
We all admit and agree that throughout the police force, throughout the country, there are racist people in every position.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can we all agree that?
Yeah.
That's the issue of
as much as racism exists in like humanity, sure, of course.
Yeah. There are racists that hate white people. There are racists that hate Asians. There are probably people that have a predispensity to hating people that don't have sexual preferences that they agree. I agree. There's bigots everywhere of all stripes.
Exactly. And what I'm saying is, well, we just need to fix the system. How the fuck do we fix it when it's so rampant they're everywhere? Why are the other cops not speaking up about their partners, the people they know? I promise everybody here who's ever had a job, you know the shitty employees, you know the shitty people that you have worked with. How the fuck do they not know? Why are they not reporting? Why are these cops not getting fired? That is the issue.
lack of
And
oversight.
that's a huge.
My wife's a cop, so and I'm not one of these biased people that it's like all cops are good and stuff like that. But I'll tell you this: you're never gonna have a fix, and I don't mean that we can't work towards.
Right.
It's one of those things. It will be a nonstop. We need to deal with this as the issues arise. But the one thing I have a lot of cop friends, and they tell me the same thing: recruitment. They don't always get the best. And then the other part of it is it's lack of oversight. And biggest thing, lack of training, lack of hand-to-hand training, lack of qualification. And then there's also fitness. There's many things involved in this. So yes, I agree with what you're saying. And then that cop that's targeting you, individually, he's profiling you. And that's illegal. You shouldn't be doing that. It's like, unless you have justifiable cause, there's no reason for you to pull him over. And if not, but and the thing that you brought up some really good points. I think Americans, especially white America, are waking up. I think white America is waking up to what black people have been dealing with for a very long time in regards to racial profiling, things such as that. And I think it's starting to dawn on, look, admitting this does not mean that you hate white people or that you hate cops. It's admitting that there is a problem here, and maybe black people are bringing it to attention, which is tyranny from behind a badge. I just kind of hope that, from my own perspective, that the BLM and the movements out there kind of take it a step further and say, okay, now we're dealing with police. Now let's talk government tyranny. Let's keep pushing. Let's keep going with it.
And real quick, John, what you said there, right? You're talking about bad cops. And I agree, John. Like, that's inevitable, that what we need to work for. What do you think defunding police departments is going to do? If you have less money to pay police officers, is it going to attract the best of the best? Or are you going to get people that are more willing to engage in authoritarian, brutal actions?
Because at the end of the day, they're not fucking here to protect us no more.
That's an outrageous overgeneralization, I think.
Yeah, I think that's outrageous, dude.
Let me. The Supreme Court has upheld multiple times that the police in America have no duty to protect.
Yep,
that's just a fact of the police system.
But I think from past we thought that, but Catherine actually makes a good point, because even I thought that, because it's protect and serve, which again supports the Second Amendment, to where they're not going to be there. You better be able to defend yourself.
Yeah, 100%.
We've seen the budget of the police department continuously rise in America, and we still have not gotten the best of the best. So the idea that simply defunding will make that situation worse is, I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't think adding more money to this problem clearly hasn't helped already. We're at the situation that we're at. So the idea of, again, shrinking down the roles, right, in which we bring these people in, is just one solution. I agree with what John's saying, is that, like, it's a continuous problem. No one's saying that a magic bullet will solve this issue. There are all kinds of edge cases where, because we made this reform, well, this person has died. That's going to happen, absolutely. But we're trying to make systemic reforms to handle the issues that we are seeing currently. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I do want to add to that. And as far as the discussion of defunding police, when people bring that up and you ask the question, well, what does that mean? Well, I mean, there's a lot of waste in police departments, as with a lot of other groups or other publicly funded departments, and so you do need to have that oversight to be able to actually, like, specifically talk about, okay, where is that money going, and what is it going to lead to? So when you say, oh, if we defund the police, that means that it's going to be less for their paychecks. I disagree. I think that if we talk about fair police union contracts, first of all, if the police can't even reform properly, then they probably shouldn't even have a union, because they continue to keep shitty cops on duty. But if we are able to establish fair police union contracts that does get those shitty cops out and promotes better policing all around, then we could talk about how we can push those funds into the pockets of good cops who do deserve their salaries. But let's also talk about where else that money goes to, which goes into the next issue I'd like to see: demilitarization of cops. Ever since the war on drugs, which I'm glad, Rob, you agree with us that that shouldn't even be a thing. Ever since Reagan pushed for the war on drugs in the 80s, we've seen staunch militarization of the cops getting fucking tanks, cops getting assault rifles, cops getting access to so much more advanced weaponry than is necessary for them to conduct their duties. And I think that if we do demilitarize, that does inevitably defund, because they no longer need those funds to go towards these vehicles or these weapons or any of the armor that they're putting on. And that's not to say that police forces don't need to have access to any weaponry or anything like that. But let's discuss specifically where and how they are getting this type of weaponry, and whether or not that's even feasible to keep in police departments in general, and whether or not we need to allow that to continue, especially in certain communities where there's no point and no reason for them. I know this is going to be a little anecdotal, but I do want to bring up the fact that I used to live in Redmond, and that place, Redmond, Washington, they upgraded cop cars to fucking Dodges, like these there was no point in these cops having like really insane fast sports cars. Like I understand they try to say, oh well, it's because we want to catch the bad guys more quickly and effectively, because we need to have a car that's fast. But you don't need to buy fucking Dodge sports cars. You could easily and effectively get a vehicle that is going to get the job done, but isn't going to break the wallets of the people that are in the community. Even though
you live in Redmond,
I used to live in Redmond for a short period of time.
Microsoft country, like obviously.
Well, I understand that, and I didn't live in a part of Redmond that was necessarily like it wasn't the grand all like Microsoft area either, and also we only lived there for a very short time when it was more affordable.
Yeah. But yeah, VoiceBox, let me just apologize. Honestly, I really mean this. It is unfair of me to overcharacterize what everyone means by defund the police. I think you made some reasonable suggestions there. But I think that the reaction, the claims of defund the police, though, the libertarian in me is like, yeah, absolutely. We should defund all sorts of government agencies. But I don't know that that's where the motivation of a lot of the rhetoric of defund the police is coming now. I think defund the police means there's too many cops, there's too many enforcement, and that's where it's going. But I do think you're right. There's plenty of things we could do to cut fat, and it wouldn't necessarily having more money to the cops, less money to the administrators, that type of thing. But I do want to say, again, I'm not accusing or anyone here or smearing the legitimate protesters over this. But I do think if your concern is militarization of the police, these riots are the worst thing that could happen, because we literally have, for example, de Blasio saying, oh, I have the largest city police force in the world, and they were beat. They were overran. I couldn't handle it. So as soon as you get a conservative, a big law enforcement person that becomes mayor, they're going to be saying, we need more AR-15s, we need more tanks, we need more crowd disposal methods. And so again, I think that's one of the reasons we really should all focus on why this violence is bad and the riots are bad, because it's actually going to have secondary effects like more of a militarization of police.
I got to ask, can y'all give me an example of which police force has a tank? There's a difference in a PMC and a water cannon. The police force does not have tanks. So let's keep this.
We're talking about. I think when people use the word tank, they're talking about like armored vehicles, right?
Okay,
like,
armored personnel carrier. Okay,
yeah,
which does not have the capabilities of a tank.
Right.
They're APC. Yeah, they're APC. So as far as AR-15s, I prefer the police officers to have an AR-15 for accuracy versus a shotgun. So if we're talking about specifics of weapons and munitions, I think this is a conversation that we need to be having, that people understand the benefits and the pros and the cons. And of course, there will always be abuse of said things, but to make these inaccurate assumptions or comparisons, we need to actually understand ballistics. We need to understand accuracy, distance, fire, and I get it. I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, we're talking about, we're looking at, right, what about gang war? What about what about, sex trafficking, things such as that? Have you been to the southern border and see what the police are dealing with down there? As far as firepower, Jesus Christ, it's insane. So
guess why?
Since when are we at? Since when do we have like war lines at our southern border with like fucking police on one end and fucking the cartel on the other? I've
it's
never
not like
seen
that. No, it's not. Of course, it's not like that, because it's not like it's people going across borders back and forth. Did you not see the 13 graves that were discovered in Las Vegas that the police were out there as far as MS-13? and friggin' things they've dealt with over time through gangs.
But what
and
is
these
police
gangs
officers having AR-15 going to do to address any of this?
Can anyone give me one example of a person that was killed by a cop that wouldn't have been?
I just want to know what is cops with AR-15s going to do to solve the drug problem?
It's not just no, I didn't reference drug problem. I'm talking about sex trafficking things.
No, you did. You talked about trafficking from the cartel, right?
Yeah, sex trafficking.
Okay. And how are AR-15s in the hands of police officers going to fix that?
So again, it kind of goes back to the whole Second Amendment. What they have, you should have access to. So if these people are coming over here, with
not necessarily the police officers, right?
So then who? Are you going to go down there and
maybe a specific agency dealt to handle this sort of situation?
Really? So agencies like the ATF and the free like more government agencies? Is that what you're calling for? Right. More government agencies? I'm confused on this. Like, if you're saying your argument is based around the fact that you don't want a cop having an AR-15, which, by the way, Second Amendment, I agree with it. But I think that if they have tanks, we get tanks. But it seems like you're confusing some things here to where it's like you want more government agencies being created.
The point is that we're talking about the use of force in response to protests, right? We've already hauled out the National Guard, which is a super militarized force to handle these protesters.
Right.
Why do we need to like further arm police officers to respond to protests?
They've already got AR-15s, so is the National Guard, and so can you, depending upon where you live and where you vote.
But no, the argument is everyone says, well, we're against the Second Amendment. You shouldn't have the right to defend yourself. Then they say, well, the police are racist. We shouldn't have them defending us. And then when they're like, well, we'll send the National Guard. No, that's tyranny to send in the National Guard.
We need more government agencies to get involved, but the government is failing right now.
No, the point is if police officers weren't as militarized and armed as they were right now, and they weren't trained to use fucking such like violent tactics to handle these protesters, you wouldn't have had to call in the fucking National Guard in the first place.
There wouldn't be riots
in New York. They are going soft on them. That's why the National Guard is there.
They're going soft on them. They literally gassed people outside of the White House just so that the president can have a fucking photo op. But like protesters who were not engaging in any sort of violence, they provoked it on them.
But you're also making two different comparisons. You're talking about people that were peacefully protesting, which I agree with you on. That was fucked up. Even if they were asked to move, because they're lawful assembly, they were wrong. But that's an unfair comparison. It's inaccurate. Now let's go to the comparison of people that are beating people, burning businesses, assaulting them, destroying lives. Are you telling me that
happened as a reaction to police officers stoking violence at their peaceful protests?
What's on the Second Amendment point, though?
It's ridiculous because it goes against every narrative you've been fed by your little fucking piece of shit right-wing media outlets. Like that's the only reason you're upset when I bring that up every time.
So real quick,
you just went all over the place on that one. I'm not even understanding what you're going for. You made this inaccurate comparison of a peaceful protest being broken up, which I disagree with. Again, it's their right, to people actually being assaulted, which you said. Now you're making a comparison of that the protesters and the rioters and looters are now the same based upon the action of George Floyd. You literally just compared the protesters protesting peacefully for a justifiable cause that I agree with to rioters and murderers and looters, and you're saying they're the same? That's exactly.
No, John, I actually didn't. If you actually listen to what I said, what I was saying was that the rioting and looting, all of the violence caused at these protests was a response to the initial act of violence enacted by the police officers themselves.
So you're saying it's justified?
But we already.
I'm not making justifications for rioting and looting. I personally think that these protests are more productive if they are peaceful. I think if you actually go and look at how the majority of these protests are being handled and organized, they are handled and organized in a peaceful way. People that stoke violence within these crowds are being taken care of, and disencouraged from engaging in such behavior. What fucks all of that up is when you have a response from the police force where they are tear gassing and shooting fucking rubber bullets and etc. at otherwise peaceful protests, right? Then that opens up the floodgates of people to act in ways like rioting and looting that aren't in the best interest of
rioting and looting happened first. Rioting and looting happened first. Oh, absolutely.
No. Actually, no. This is absolutely a false recurrence of events. Okay, so the protests in Minneapolis, were 100% peaceful until the police officers stoked violence amongst protesters.
It's outrageous. I mean, the argument here is so ridiculous because what you're saying is the guy, for example, the guy in Richmond, the group of gentlemen that are beating an old woman with a 2x4, breaking into her shop, the husband screaming, pleading, stop beating my wife. So they start beating him. They were peaceful people. They weren't going to do anything wrong until a cop shot tear gas. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, now we have to go beat this old woman.
Actually, they weren't going to do anything wrong until the police stepped forward, escalated violence, and caused chaos.
I'm looking for any rioters. I'm looking for any.
Let's let Catherine finish.
Yeah. So the police escalate violence. They start shooting out tear gas and rubber bullets, and all the protesters run away. And suddenly there's chaos in the streets that looters can take advantage of to go out and do these crimes undercover from what used to be peaceful protesters. And now are people running in fear for their lives because the cops are shooting at them.
Cause and effect, which I will agree with. I agree, Catherine, on that one. But I'm also looking at, I'm not seeing a single use of an AR-15 by a police officer in any of the protests right now. I'm seeing them making arrests, which is a violation of the second.
Issues now. It's like,
Right.
The argument's going all over the place. I'm trying to keep up here. I'm sorry.
I disagree with you, John. Please, if you're going to make the claim where we could see heinous, violent felonies coming, including murders, if you're going to make the claim every one of those was the result of a cop shooting tear gas, you need to back up that claim. So we've had how many different nights in how many cities with how many violence riots that were going on?
Wait, can you just reiterate? Can you reiterate the straw man claim that you just laid out and are now arguing against? What exactly is the claim that you're putting forward? Because I don't think
the claim that you're making that all of the violence was the result of the police. That's not the claim you're making. That's what we just spent
all
10
of the
minutes
violence.
Yes, all the looters and
you're saying the police initiated violence, and therefore all violence stems from their initiation.
Exactly. No, hold on, wait. He actually didn't say that. He said the violence
earlier. He said it earlier.
Oh, okay. From what he was talking to me, he said the violence was stemming from George Floyd.
I'm posing as a question if that's
okay.
No, they're not. By the way, John, they're not saying the violence came from Floyd. They're saying the violence of the cops doing crowd control and using tear gas. That's in each riot we see. Okay. Every single one was a peaceful protest. And then the cops came in. And then because the cops were there, people went out and beat old ladies and murdered security guards. That's their argument.
Yeah, I'm confused. Okay. Gotcha.
No matter what, there's always going to be shitty people that will go to events like this and fuck shit up for the sole reason of fucking shit up.
Thank you. That's my point, Don.
I agree.
Don, that was my point. Yes, there is always people who are going to try and instigate and take these kind of violence. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't think Black Lives Matter and what the protest is either a left or right political issue. To me, this is people need to be treated fairly and equal. I don't see how that's a left or right issue. Anybody who's trying to make that to me is just grabbing for.
So I got to disagree with you, bro. And it's not that I disagree with you. It's the fact that this is a very political issue. It's being made into a political issue, and it shouldn't be. No, I know what you're saying, but the problem that we're facing right now, it's like a left and right gambit between, unfortunately, that's why I see it that way, to where it's.
I think you mean partisan. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. It is absolutely inherently political. Yeah,
I agree.
That's a better word. But what I'm saying is, there's going to be people that come out just to fuck shit up, and they will be there regardless if the police are tear gassing someone or they're not. But at the same fucking point, our police have been hitting peaceful protesters. I've seen videos of people with their hands up and their corona mask on and having that pulled down and maced in the face. I have seen people that were talking and pleading, saying, please, I want to meet your fucking family, come and get arrested. That is not
a video
and that's
recently.
not a government that we should be fucking funding.
There's an issue here. I want to ask the panel a question, though, because this is a question that I've actually asked myself for a while. But before I get with that one, I saw a video of two DPD officers here in Dallas, Texas. They were wrestling with a dude who was clearly unarmed, and the gentleman on top of it pulls out his freaking 9mm and kills him. That wasn't DPD because that was
not our people.
Okay,
no.
Well, it was two police officers. It was two police officers, and I saw this, and I was like, I can't see any justification, but at the same time, it's like I wasn't there. I don't know if that dude had I don't know. and it's not trying to justify their actions or demonize them. It's one of these things that I don't think we're getting the solid story from either side of the aisle. I think there's so much misinformation.
There would be no. So the person in question was already subdued, correct? There's probably no.
He was struggling. That's
okay.
The
I mean, you said that two officers were on top of him.
Yeah. But he wasn't
there's no need.
subdued, no.
There's no need for a use of a firearm in that situation.
Oh no, yeah, I agree. But at the same time, though, I couldn't see his hand, so I don't know if he was grabbing for something. That's what I'm saying.
So on this issue, to what John was referring to, it also brings up the subject of police credibility, right? So we've seen over and over again police lie about the incidences that occurred. For instance, you've all seen the incidents of the 75-year-old man being knocked over. What the police said was that, someone got hurt here and they tripped. They said he tripped when he was pushed. This has been replicated again and again over these protests, right? So let's say the police make a report on the incident you're referring to, John, right? And they say he did have a weapon. Should we necessarily believe them? Should the media necessarily take the words of the police, not understanding that the police also have motivated reasoning? They're not simply a neutral arbiter of the facts.
Great point. I agree. But
I agree.
The issue that we have is like, look, we're treating. Let me say this up front. Yes, we should hold law enforcement and people in positions of power to a higher standard. Totally agree. But are human. We literally have we've talked on this panel about how violence is justified against all police. It's not a revolution pointed upward, it's downward. When Nike and Chase Bank and pretty much every corporation in the world, almost every politician, almost every academic is all like, yes, Black Lives Matter, police are systemically racist. You make crap money, you're put in these situations during these riots where you're under physical threat. Everyone thinks you're a racist. There are police that are going to act poorly in that situation. Does that mean we shouldn't hold them accountable? Absolutely not.
You're saying that it's like punching down, but police officers are like, by nature of their job, by the nature of like the institution that they serve, have more rights than the average citizen. This is an institution that holds power over the average person.
But who holds power over
punching down? This is punching
up. Who holds power over that institution? All of like we could see, for example, in Minneapolis. Who has oversight of the police? It's all of these politicians. Yeah, it's the mayor, right? The chief. All of these people, they're all big Black Lives Matter people. The Attorney General, Keith Ellison.
Yeah, now.
But the problem is that saying Black Lives Matter doesn't mean anything if policy doesn't come out of it.
That's exactly right. That's why my point is that they're using the racial angle of this as a grift because they don't change anything. Everything always goes the same. We keep acting like, well, this is somehow, this is the fault of like Donald Trump or this is the fault of the right wing. The truth is that the issues are police brutality, systemic poverty, and instead we cover it as if it's this big racial issue that allows these people at the top to keep saying, yes, you poor people keep fighting with each other over skin color or gender or something, when we should all be furious that the fact that the establishment has been screwing us over for the past 70 years.
Preach.
Well, it's multifaceted. It is in part the systemic poverty, as you mentioned, but as I mentioned too, that is also a symptom of systemic racism because, again, as I mentioned earlier, Black people and other minorities are on average more impoverished than whites are, and that's not to say or discredit the fact that there are plenty of homeless or just poor white people in our country. Absolutely there are. The fact that we don't even have universal fucking health care should be proof enough of how serious this problem is where people can't even afford fucking medicine. So of course they're gonna see this as an overarching issue. But I mean at the same time, the focus right now is the fact that just in general, our police system is systematically targeting minority groups well above white groups or even just in general, punishing people with impunity because they have no oversight, they have no recourse for their actions. And ultimately, it leads to a path of of destruction and violence, because in response to all this, the people have no choice but to lash out, because everywhere they go, when they do try to be peaceful, even now in these times, they're constantly beaten down, or at least berated, not just by the cops, but you have society over here telling them, well, all lives matter. Or you have people that are coming out and talking shit about the protesters as a whole, saying like, well, they shouldn't be doing that. They should do it this way. But before, even John alluded to it, like, I think Colin Kaepernick may be onto something. You say that now? You didn't think that like immediately after he was going out and doing the protest in the first place? This is the
irony. No, hold on. If you want me to sit there and open my mind to a new way of thinking, doing what you just did is going to turn off more people from ever hearing your message to begin with. Because I'm not saying how he did it, I agreed with, but he did bring to light an issue that did need to be addressed. So if you want to sit there and point the finger at me and say, you didn't care back then, well, guess what? I've changed my mind since then. But if you want to even sit down and have a discussion with me, or white people in general to get on board with the BLM, and I don't agree with all of their points, dude, let me explain. Let me put into context where I come from on this. I've got a following of over 1 million people from YouTube, Facebook to Instagram. I was a devout right-winger. And then when I come out and I go to an actual protest and sit down with BLM members and I open my mind to a new way of thinking, saying, you know what? I just want to hear your side of the story. I want to see where you're coming from. And I sit down and I talk to these protesters, not looters, protesters. And they start saying, look, we just want equality and pull away from the tyranny of the badge. And then I go on my Instagram, and you can go look at the post right now and say, look, BLM, they have a justified message, not all of it. You know how much shit I took for that?
Yeah.
So when you want to sit there and tell me that, well, you didn't care back then, well, I care now, and I'm listening. So if you want to point the ridicule finger and browbeat at me because now I've changed my mind, I'm coming around because of the way I was indoctrinated by Fox News, the way I grew up in Southeast Texas, and now you want to sit there and look down your nose at me and say, oh, blah, blah, that's very disrespectful to people. So if you really want white people right now, whom you need, which make up the majority of America, mainly the right, I would suggest not utilizing that tactic, because you're going to alienate us and you're going to shut down the conversations. I'll talk to you all day. But if you go out there and you push that type of narrative, brother, good luck. They will shut you down so quick, because generally people are fucking stupid. That's all I got to say. Now, other things you said, I agree with.
All of that, yeah.
So
I said, but I think that one of the problems that we're making here is, again, we're looking at data sets and we don't look at the reasons behind them. So, and I just think, again,
I agree.
Keep in mind, this is coming from people that have said violence against all police is justified to some extent. The argument is, if disproportionately police kill blacks than whites, that proves racism. If George Floyd got killed, that proves he was killed for being black. That's not true. That argument is just as unfounded and repugnant as me saying 50% of homicides are committed by 13% of the population, black people. Therefore, black people are worse. Both of those arguments is not looking at the context for why those things happen. If you were a police officer and you're basically, again, I understand what you're saying, that they're in positions of power, but the
Rob,
entire world thought George Floyd. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The problem is that you are engaging in more class reductionism than any of the dumb LARPing leftists that I've talked to in the past couple of weeks about this issue, which is actually ironic coming from like for this right winger on the panel. What you are saying right now is like, hey, why are you making it all about racial issues when this is like more about the class issues that black people face? Like we should be talking about how poor they are and like how bad inner cities are, et cetera, instead of actually tackling the issue that, or even being willing to realize that, like, hey, racism actually does play at least some factor in why black people are disproportionately the victims of police brutality, right? We have studies. You want to talk about data sets? Let's talk about the studies that show that black boys as young as 10 are viewed not in the same light of childhood innocence as their white peers by police officers. What about those studies? Are you just going to ignore that, like, that there isn't like these sort of like racial biases amongst like a lot of the police officers that are recruited into the police force?
You could, I would be willing to read the study. I'm absolutely willing to read anything, but I know for in fact the implicit racial bias studies where they show you a picture of a white person and a black person, then have.
What about the ones that show people have a tendency to perceive black men as larger and more threatening than similarly sized white men? What about those studies?
Is it because?
So why are we not asking the question? Why does that even exist in the first place?
Why does it exist?
You're talking about stereotypes. Yeah, I agree. We're talking about stereotypes. So let's follow the rabbit down the hole. Why do the stereotypes exist?
Because a long history of institutionalized systematic racism against Black people. Yeah.
I think it all
stems from a cultural upbringing. So I think
no, it's not a cultural upbringing. This is like the material effects of a nation that has basically subjugated
a cultural
Black people.
upbringing of white people versus Black people, not putting negative or positive connotations. Let me finish. When people, I think initially look at Black people that are victims of racism or lower economic status. I talked about this the other day. I spoke with another guy. We actually really great discussion talking about how does a low economic Black man or white man just in general make that jump from a $15 an hour job to go towards a more career-oriented job when they can't even afford to get an education or go to a trade school. They can't go take out a loan for a freaking student loan because their credit is just non-existent. Where does that economic jump come into? Now, that point needs to be discussed. How do we fix that? I don't have an answer to that. It's a very good discussion. But the main point that I want to talk about is that Jim Crow abolished in 1965 did not end racism, and it certainly didn't promote equality. It took years. Let's backtrack even more to the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation. It didn't suddenly mean that, hey, all Black people are free. Now you can go get jobs. It didn't exist. There were still many racist white people. So, yes, when they were brought over to America from the transatlantic slave trade, yes, they were at a sincere economic disadvantage that existed all the way up into the 1960s, even up into the 70s. So when people say, like, well, your ancestors were enslaved, and I'm, look, guilty, fucking guilty, bro. I'm opening my mind to new trains of thought. And suddenly it dawns on you, it's like, no, you're actually right. From an economic standpoint, they haven't even had 50 years of economic fairness. No wonder there's economic poverty at a higher rate in the Black community. It makes sense. But now the question is, how do we fix that?
Well, this is the problem. Like sorry, Prime, please.
No problem. And to play off of MindWave's point about the class reductionists, right? Yes, it's a class issue, and something I bring up all the time. It's absolutely a class issue, and that and also whites of a lower economic status, they can be targets as well, right? They can suffer all these issues, right? But let's not forget that race plays a role in this. Like, even if you are a Black middle class or Black upper class person, they do exist. You are a top person. Yeah, some people don't realize.
I know. I feel you.
But if a cop sees you and doesn't know that you are of privilege, right? Then they will. And if they have that racial bias in their mind, right? Not all cops, but if they have that racial bias in their mind, you are now more of a target for violence, right? We need to understand that, yes, again, class plays an issue, but these things are intersectional. I know you guys hate that term, but intersectional. These things cross boundaries, right? If a cop maybe sees, for instance, a Black guy in a suit on Wall Street, or maybe he'll think twice about it, right? But it could be that same guy, right, dressed down a few neighborhoods over, and then that guy is open for violence. It could be of the same economic class. So these things play off of each other.
But I think we're missing a crucial point here in regards to humanity and the way that the human mind works. If a cop, say for example, a white cop works in inner city Chicago and he's exposed to a lot of Black crime, and that becomes a repetitive nature in his mindset to where this is all I'm exposed to. Look, I gotta admit, I can understand why he would use, exactly. it is profiling to an extent, but why he would view some things in regards to what you just discussed as being suspicious. And I think the stopping point in fixing that, though, is whether or not he acts or she acts on it. Because the thing is, like, I'm suspicious of all cops. I'm more suspicious of all goddamn politicians. But I think that suspicion is not implicit of guilt. There's suspicion whether or not you act on it or not, and that's basically, to me, that's complacency.
Well, the suspicion should never be held just because a person is Black. Just because you see a Black person trying to get into a car, we shouldn't assume they're breaking into it just because they're Black, right? Like, I understand that, like, when you have police forces that are over policing socioeconomically poor areas, which are predominantly Black, it's going to lead to reinforcing maybe some negative stereotypes of Black people that they already held. But like, the only way that you really solve that is through, I guess, training and bettering, like, the ways that you sort of hire people or bring them into the force, etc.
Just to bolster your point, MindWaves, a lot of those cops that work in inner cities don't even live in the same communities that the people they're policing are from, which is also a major problem because they also have intrinsic beliefs or suspicions of these people when they don't even interact with them at a community level. For example, you know, if you see cops in Oakland, a lot of them live in San Francisco. They live across the bridge because it's safer there for them, because they don't want to be associated with those people, those untouchables or undesirables, or even just the fact that they can afford to move out. So in those poorer communities, they're obviously not going to want to live there. They're not treated very well. So then they police these communities when they're not even from those communities and have that intrinsic bias and have those suspicions that will inevitably creep up further because of the fact that they are now reinforcing those with the images without understanding the underlying problems, because they don't.
See, I got to disagree with you on that one, though. Because
like, if I could jump in real quick. Just real quick, I was going to say, but again, like that means it's even if that was true, then that's an issue of poverty and people living in different classes. Studies show over and over again that actually there is no difference, or it's within the statistical margin of error, that police officers of color are just as likely to use their firearm against black people, if not more, than police officers that are white. So it's not necessarily, oh, I'm not from this community, so I'm more likely to use firepower. And the other thing is, we have, of course, stereotypes exist, of course. And I know that everyone wants to be like, stereotypes shouldn't exist. That's not human nature. Again, I'm not making this point to try to deflect necessarily, but men, by and large, are treated with more hostility and more suspicion by police than women, to a bigger degree that blacks are mistreated by the discrepancy towards men. Now, the question is, why would a cop, for example, if there was a violent crime and you didn't have a description of the suspect, who do you think comes to the cop's mind? Probably a man. Right? Now, why does the cop have that stare? Is it right for him to profile men? Well, no, but there's a reason that profile came. It's because, by and large, men do commit more violent crime. So it's not right that comes to their head. And just like it's not right that if a cop says, oh, I think there was something heinous that happened in this inner city neighborhood, it must be a black person. But if you're in these streets, and again, I'm not defending this, I'm just saying we have to get real and talk about why this happens. If you're in communities where a small percentage of people is young black males commit 50% of homicides, the cops dealing with that day in and day out, they're gonna have an image when they see a murder of who's most likely. Doesn't make it right, but I'm saying when we just shout racism, we ignore all of the underlying factors, and if we ignore those factors, then we could never solve the problem.
Well, maybe they're not actually committing that much crime, or sorry, I just wanted to clarify or beat this point. Maybe they're not the ones that are specifically just committing that level of crime. Maybe they're just the ones that are sought after by the police. For instance, I mean, when you look at stop and frisk and how that disproportionately attacked blacks and other minorities in general, at the height of
I gotta have that real quick though. That was definitely government overreach.
Right.
Oh, okay, sure, but you know, obviously the police enforced that. They didn't buck back and say we're not going to do this because it's unconstitutional. They went along with it, and so because of that, of the 685,724 people that were stopped and frisked in 2011, 88% of them were innocent, with 350,743 of those stop and frisks being against black people, with only 9% of that total number being white people, and 51% of them being people or children ages 14 to 24.
Right. I think we're all in agreement that stop and frisk should never have been allowed.
And let's be honest, stop and frisk wasn't occurring in neighborhoods where there wasn't violent crime. Again, this goes back to, I agree with you that I'm not saying this profiling is unfair, it's especially egregious if you're a police officer and you're like, man, I'm in these inner cities, there's homicides, but you're pulling someone over for a speeding ticket and you're allowing race to factor into that. That I don't get. I'm with you 100%. I think the numbers show 13% you're more likely to be pulled over if you're black for a speeding ticket. But that's not what's going on. That's not what these protests are about. It's about the idea that cops are profiling and targeting and for racism killing unarmed black men. And the reason something like stop and frisk would occur...
it doesn't matter if the reason they're doing it is because of racism, right? The outcome is that one race is being predominantly targeted by these things, right?
But then the question is, why is that? And that's when we need to look at, just to say, well, if this race is targeted more, that proves some sort of prejudice or racism, isn't an honest take. Because again, why was stop?
If there's no other good reason besides
50% of homicides are occurring in that community. And for
so what you're doing right now, effectively, you're making a justification for profiling black people. You're saying we should actually profile black people because they actually do commit a lot of the crime.
That's not what I'm doing.
He's saying that's why the stereotype exists.
That's exactly
okay, but
so you're going into that crime with the person in mind of the killer is a black male, which can cloud your fucking judgment.
I agree. But that's the why are you
wait. I agree.
The problem is that Rob, your response is always, oh, but why does that stereotype exist? Oh, it's because they commit the most crime. You're saying, then what? We just let them have that sort of profile in their head. We just let them police with that profile.
No, I'm saying that to say systemic racism, right? That's the answer. That's what everyone's not everyone here, but that's what most people here are saying, what most people are saying that are protesting systemic racism, but we don't look at the underlying factors, right? We just say,
what is the cause of it then? What is the cause of it?
Listen, just give me 1 second. If you say, well, black people on average are poorer than white people, therefore that proves racism. That does not prove racism. There are a myriad of very complicated factors. Again, and my point about these homicides, just to say to VoiceBox, let's take the perpetrators out of it for a minute. We know that races predominantly, again, this is something that the racist on the right want to say, white supremacists. They'll say, oh, black people commit the most homicides, so they're terrible. They're hunting and killing white men. Not really. The statistics are pretty clear that people kill in their own race. So if we could look at the National Crime Victimization Survey and see that 52% of homicide victims are from the African American community, that probably is a pretty good indicator that the vast majority of those people killed, those black victims, were killed by black people in their community. And so the idea of, well, maybe the police are just, you might be able to say that about crimes of like a speeding ticket or smoking weed. I do not believe the police are manufacturing homicides just to throw black men in jail. And so that leads us to the question of what came first, the chicken or the egg? Why do cops have this belief about men? Why do they have it about black people in the community?
So Rob, you're saying like we don't look into these questions of the underlying issues that cause this systemic racism issues, right? And this is literally what we do on the left. This is called intersectionality. All we do is look at the way these different things work into each other. We look at the historical context of why more black people are poor than white people, and why this then turns into these things that aren't fueled by racism, but have racist outcome.
Okay, Catherine, as an intersectional person, do you think that we live in a misandrous society because men are abused by cops more than women?
I believe we live in a patriarchal society, and it's bad for men and women.
So it's masculinity that's the problem why men get abused by cops.
No, I wish you guys would understand the concept
that is such a far
about before criticizing them. So,
explain that.
The point here,
learning on that one.
Yeah. So the point here is that patriarchy, which means a system predominantly controlled by and influenced by men, negatively affects both women and men, right? Men are victims of the patriarchy in a lot of different ways, like a lot of ways that you said, Rob, that like they are more likely to be, criminals. They are more likely to be, victims of police brutality, like you said, compared to women as well. A lot of these sort of like social expectations of men leads to them not being able to express themselves and leads to higher suicide rates amongst men as well. Yeah, men actually are the victims of patriarchy in a lot of ways, right? Doesn't mean that they don't hold the most power within society compared to women.
It's absurd. Like I could make the same generalization. I could say, "Oh, the problem is."
Rob, this isn't a generalization. This isn't a generalization in any way. I'm describing to you the material effects of patriarchy.
The generalization is, a system where men are in control leads to all this. It's such a generalization.
No.
The patriarchy is responsible.
Okay, everybody stop. Everybody stop. Okay. Everybody, if you want to speak, raise your hand. I do this this happens once an episode.
I went up first, teacher. Okay. I put my hand up first, teacher.
Brento, the more you beg, the least you're gonna get it. Okay. I'm gonna give it. You're begging, so I'm giving you the mustache dom.
Oh, fuck me, dude. I hate this podcast.
Area.
Keep coming back, MindWaves.
Being as taken care of as women does not mean we live in a matriarchal society.
We can barely hear you.
We are more given, or we have more opportunity to get killed by police officers. We have more opportunity to get beat than women do. But we also have more opportunity to succeed throughout every different aspect of life compared to women.
That's untrue.
How so?
Yeah, because it's not about opportunity. You say we have more opportunity. Prove it.
So Rob really just came in here so he could be like, y'all need to shut up about black people. I want to talk about men's issues.
That's not what I said at all. And of course you would overgeneralize.
It's what you've been doing this entire conversation. You keep saying, why are we talking about Black Lives Matters when actually men are, if you look at the statistics, men's are actually way more disproportionately affected by this issue.
Right. And it wasn't to deflect to talk about men's issues. The point was there is a reason there's a stereotype.
And so what do we do about it? So what do we do about it, Rob?
Well, what you do is you don't just say, "Oh, it's all because men are in charge." Oh, it's all.
No, don't tell me what we don't do. Tell me what we do about it.
Okay, we have a serious discussion about how the elites are using race and gender issues to divide us, so that they can continue to be corrupt and destroy.
Wait! This is a race issue. You're talking about racial stereotypes. How do we stop police officers from using racial stereotypes to profile people?
We use what's going on, the idea of police brutality, and we end it. You will never be. If your argument is how do we end people from stereotyping, good luck.
So you have nothing. So you have nothing. You have nothing to tackle the issue of racism, within these institutions at all.
Isn't engaging in a stereotype. We should all strive not to. The problem is acting negatively based on that stereotype. And this discussion is saying, well, we need to remove people having stereotypes.
The problem isn't just them acting upon this stereotype, right? The problem is that they hold this stereotype to be true in the first place.
But so hold on. Can I interject just real quick? Look, I think that we're misconstruing this. Is the stereotype exists from a kernel of truth based upon percentages that individual person has experienced. Now it doesn't. Now, if you're saying that you just want to go out there and look at a black person, for example, and say, "Oh, he's probably a criminal," yes, that's racist. Yeah, of course. But based upon, for example, overseas, military age male wearing a certain kind of uniform, whatever the case would be, it'd be like, okay, we're on edge. I've seen this happen numerous times. That's stereotypical of that person, how they dress, how they look, how they talk, how they act. And it benefits the person that is trying to ensure that safety is prevailing in the neighborhood to be skeptical. Now, whether or not they act on it is a whole different matter. So basically what I think Rob is saying is it's not an issue of racism. Now, again, I shouldn't generalize, not all the time, but due to higher percentage rates, that's why that stereotype exists. Or that's why they're a little bit more on edge saying, I've seen this. It's like, if every time a dude wearing a beanie that has a goatee like you comes up and punches me in the face, and it happens repeatedly, every time I see a dude wearing that, I'm going to be a little on edge.
Well, yeah, but John, the problem is that police officers, when they're policing black communities, should not be on edge 24/7 just because they are in communities that are black.
Bro, I'm sorry, but if you, as a white guy, go in downtown Dallas and you're a cop, good luck. Because I'll tell you this right now, white cops will not respond to certain.
That mentality, John, leads to unnecessary escalation of force because they are on edge, like you're talking about. They are there on the ground with black people, and they think, oh fuck,
Let's try this. Okay, so what you guys are saying, okay, people have implicit bias, right? And good luck getting rid of that. Well, yes, that's a very long-term project. Okay, but what do we do in the meantime, right? So we can recognize, right? We can work with human nature here. Okay, so people have implicit bias because of all kinds of reasons. We can name them, we can list them all. But can we put practices in place? Can we reform institutions to actually adjust for these things, right? To put, so that there's less opportunity for them to act on these situations, or maybe disincentivize people acting in negative ways, right? We can put systems in place to do that. So yes, they have implicit bias, but that doesn't mean we end the conversation there, saying, well, they have these implicit bias for these reasons, and well, good luck.
Well, but here's what I'd say. I agree with you 100%, Prime. I think you make an absolute great point. But the way we deal, my argument is that there is implicit bias, and it comes from something called tribalism, that we all tend to, whether it be politically, whether it be racially, communally organized, all of that, we all have this tribalism. When the people that are responsible for setting forth the society that has caused the major problem, the crux of the problem, which is systemic poverty, wealth disparity, screwing over the working class and the poor class people of this country, they are intentionally fanning the flames to create racial division. They're encouraging the tribalism. And so I think that the way we solve this, first off, I think we're doing what needs to happen all across the country, having a good faith conversation. But I think the way we solve this is say, look, these biases exist. We need to work on solving them. But what we can do is take away the mechanism for allowing pain or violence to result as a result of biases, instead of further feeding into tribalism by just saying, well, it's all systemic racism and all cops deserve violence against them and rioting.
No one we have never said all cops deserve violence.
Said that.
I didn't say all cops. I just said that it's a response to the violence that's being committed by the police forces and that are attending these protests and
So just to clarify, you wouldn't agree with, like, if these protesters went to somewhere and there were no police there, you wouldn't agree with them in a different area attacking a police precinct or attacking police?
If the police precinct in that area responded peacefully, or even just not at all and just let the people do their protests and there was no rioting going on, then absolutely I would like.
And just real quick, and I'm not. What if someone punches someone there and the police have to show up?
Okay, that's a different story. If the police were never there to begin with, it's only the protesters, and then things start getting violent. If the police then show up to try to break up whatever is going on there, then sure, maybe they should respond. But it still has to be on a case-by-case issue. They can't just then say, okay, well, there's like a few people fighting in this one subsection of the crowd. Let's fucking shoot tear gas and rubber bullets at all of them. It's not an even-handed response.
No, wait. Now, hold on. Wait. Well, we're talking now. We're getting to a tactical discussion, and I think you're a little off the mark on that one. Number one, if you're a civilian and you're going to a protest and suddenly you start seeing fights break out, it is now turned into almost like a damn near war zone. So if you remain there, look, here's the thing. I don't like using this four-letter word fair. Fair does not exist. If I attend a protest and I start seeing high levels of fights break out and the police are going to do what they're trained to do, which is we need to disperse these people, they do not have the manpower nor the capabilities without turning extremely violent to make that crowd disperse. So guess what? There's going to be some casualties taken that are innocent. So
when you say casualties, you don't mean casualties, you mean injuries.
Injuries, yes. Okay, same thing. My bad. Injuries. Well, casualty based upon you got shot with a rubber bullet, yeah. But what the point still remains, innocent. That like they actually weren't fighting and they got hit with some smoke bombs or CS or a rubber bullet. I mean, casualty or injury, same. The point is they're innocent. So there's going to be some crossfire there. So when we sit there and say the cops shouldn't be doing this, well, then give me a more effective technique. You're saying this is the issue. What's the solution? Because I want to see you go pick up and go some of these violent crimes where, by the way, you don't know if that dude's got a gun. And you as a police officer are there to say, hey, we got to stop this thing from getting out of hand. And now it's out of hand. Now you've got a clusterfuck on your hands. I haven't heard one situation or one tactic given by any of you on this board as how the cops should fix that, without resorting to non-lethal means, by the way, not in all situations, but when using rubber bullets and smoke and CS and tear gas, that's how it's going to get them dispersed, because then it starts feeding that mob mentality and more fights break out, more innocents starts getting injured. What's the fix?
But you're implying that that's how all these protests came about, or how all these riots came about to begin with.
No, I'm responding to your individual example that you just gave in regards to why are they using rubber bullets?
This example, I was just responding within the confines of that response. But in general, that's not what's happening. People are going out and protesting peacefully. Cops are turning out with riot shields, tear gas, rubber bullets, and all sorts of other equipment, and they're bashing people and shooting them with these weapons, and And then, of course, all hell breaks loose because everyone is running for their lives, or at least trying to get the hell out of Dodge.
Have you been to any of these protests yet? Have you been to any protests?
I don't live in an area where the protests.
I've been to three. I've been to three in downtown Dallas. I didn't see any cops with riot gear there. I saw cops. I didn't see any cops with riot gear.
I have.
Okay.
Those protests.
I know that's anecdotal for everybody here, but
well, no,
Yeah.
because I'm pretty familiar with the Dallas protests. Those protests have remained pretty pretty nonviolent. They've remained peaceful.
bro.
Okay, well,
Are you talking about downtown Dallas that was on fire not 2 nights ago?
Wait,
are we talking about the same Dallas, Texas?
Are we going to talk about individual?
Yeah, I'm talking about the majority of the protesting that's been going on in Dallas. Yeah, the majority of it is peaceful. Yeah, there was some lighting on fire of the fucking
The chief of police, freaking Renee Hall, was assaulted outside of the police station. Like, are you serious?
Yeah.
The majority? You're talking about individual protests that converged and there was massive freaking, almost damn near rioting? I mean, there are some peaceful, and I went to the ones that actually remain peaceful, but there were no police in riot gear. There weren't even police like even out there freaking like looking militaristic. But as soon as the protests grew to where it's like, look, this is turning, they were called in. So when the mob mentality takes over and that peaceful, and I'm for protesting. I think those that got gassed because Trump wanted to go take a fucking photo op picture, which was just ridiculous to me. Like, cool, you're holding the Bible that you probably don't even read, bro. I get it. I'm going track. But the point of it is, what are cops supposed to do? It's my civil right.
Wait. What are cops supposed to? Wait. What are cops supposed to do? They're supposed to allow them to protest peacefully.
But when the protest turns violent, is what I'm saying.
Wait. When did these protests turn violent? And like why?
In their hypothetical, that's when it turned violent. In the hypothetical.
No, you referenced Dallas. You talked. I talked about Dallas. First, it started off with VoiceBox. I asked you if you've been to any protests because you said there are cops are all showing up in riot gear. Those are your words verbatim. I said I've been to 3. They didn't. And then MindWaves tuned in and he's like, "Well, Dallas, I know about." I was like, "Really?" Because I live in Dallas and I went to it. It turned violent.
I'm curious about a solution that I want to propose. I'm
looking at Dallas police in riot gear right now. I'm sorry.
Yes, after the violence occurred.
Let's give it the prime.
What do you expect them to do? It's like, let's show up a teddy bear.
John, let's give it the prime.
On Sunday.
MindWaves, we're giving it the prime. MindWaves, prime. Come on.
So I'm curious about a solution. And it goes back to something you had said previously, right? You said, these cops go into these neighborhoods and they have repeated interactions with people. And then that might shape their beliefs, right? And if you get hit by a guy with a goatee, you might be okay. What about a situation where we take an aspect of the military and apply it to the cops, right? What if we had tours of duty for officers, right? So officers deal with extremely stressful situations, as you said, as Rob has said, right? And then they get PTSD. Correct, right? Mm-hmm. Military members go out. We have extremely different.
Bro, you're hitting it. I know where you're going with it, and I 100% agree.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So they have extreme PTSD, right? And it affects their ability to operate. And then we have a culture in which seeking help for that is disincentivized, right? So how about we say, like, you have a 5-year tour of duty or whatever? I don't know, but a certain tour of duty, and then thank you for your service. And you may leave. And then the best cops who don't have, for instance, accusations of unwarranted violence, right? Of extreme violence, they can stay along and hopefully they rise in the ranks, right? So like in the military, the best supposedly rise in the ranks.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong, bro.
Due to performance, right? So what about that?
But you're suddenly we switched roles to where we don't want the police being militaristic. Now you're suggesting militaristic term. And here's the other thing, bro. Dallas police force is down almost 1,400 personnel in recruitment numbers, and that was 2 years ago. You're not going to have the boots to fill this because number one, the mayor did not back the police after 7/7 when 5 Dallas officers were shot dead protecting a BLM peaceful protest. By the way, mayor turned his back on him. Recruitment numbers dropped. They get treated like straight up dog shit. So to sit there and say we're going to do tours of duty, it's not feasible. It's not realistic. People are not going to go for that. It doesn't make sense. Now, if you say you do your 5 years, and if you make the cut, we'll keep you around. Who in their right mind would want to do that? It's like I'm going to commit 5 years and put my life on the line for shit pay.
Military,
like very bad. Yeah, but you volunteer to do that. But you also have full benefits. You know where you're going. And if you choose to re-enlist, you can. There's no, hey, you didn't make the cut to the fire.
Okay.
It doesn't exist.
So the military, do they, are you saying that they have soldiers out there who they know are problem soldiers, and then they don't do anything about it?
Yes. And then yes, it exists. They're called shitbags, and there's nothing you can do.
And I think that we lose. We have incidences, for instance, for Chauvin, right? The person in the George Floyd situation, the cop. He had instances of past violence, right? We have a situation happening in New York where the person didn't die, but there was an incident. It was a cop who was sitting on the neck of a man who tried to intervene in the situation, right? He had multiple accusations against them, right? To the point that the New York had paid over $100,000 in settlements to victims.
Civil suits, and
yes. Mm-hmm. So let's get rid of those cops. This is just an idea.
Now, hold on. I agree, but now we're going to a different rabbit hole. The unions are protecting the cops, but people do want the unions for fairness and equality, and then the unions are getting abused. So
I agree. I can make distinctions. I can make nuances. I'm in unions. However, the police unions operate in a very different manner. They are treated in a very different manner. Hey, I would love to take a crack at those police contracts.
And let me just say real quick, and I mean this for everyone.
I don't disagree with anything you said, Prime.
Even if you've all disagreed with me, like you guys are thinking, because you're coming at this from a different angle than me, this is the exact, like, I never thought of what you're just saying there, Prime. I could instantly, like John did, come up with like, well, wait, if we're demonizing police, it's going to be hard to get the numbers and things like that. But I think you're doing exactly what we should be doing. Let's come up with real solutions. What can we do? And I just think that sometimes we get caught up in this idea of, oh, it's real simple. Like, again, I go back. Charlemagne the God talks to Rush Limbaugh. Rush is like, give me a real world solution. How can we do this? And he says, we need to dismantle the systemic white supremacism. What does that mean? We need real solutions. And I think that we get this tribalism wedge driven between us. You're absolutely right. Number one priority, find a way to get rid of the bad cops, And let me just say something. This might be off in the weeds and see what you all think of this. I'm not making an excuse for this, but I think we culturally have something where we have this mentality of snitches get stitches, where you don't rat someone out. I think the cops have that mentality, right? Like, watch Serpico, like, you know what I mean?
Hold on, bro. Hold on. Let's push pause on that. Now, look, I am not by any stretch of the imagination justifying covering for bad cops.
Right.
I asked that exact same question to a lot of law enforcement. And here's the crazy part. A lot of law enforcement officers are libertarians at heart. It's like, dude, we don't even believe in half this shit, but our hands are tied. What are we going to do? Which we'll go to another. But the part of it is the crooked cops, number one, the ones that are adamantly like, they're untouchable. The second reason is the really crooked ones you don't know about. It's like they don't go out there and advertise, hey, I'm taking cuts. They don't know. So, and also we're generalizing again. So it's like, why aren't you calling out the bad ones? Like, because we don't know they're bad.
I need to push back on that because, okay, if you're talking about maybe cops skimming off the top, like, they make a drug bust and then they're taking money, right? Yes, they may, who knows, right? But we can look at the incidences we've seen over the past few weeks, right? We can look at points where we've seen cops use extreme force against people who did not deserve it, right? And then other cops are just milling about, right? And it seems to me that that's business as usual, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the other way of characterizing it, but it looks like that. They didn't do anything. It didn't bat an eye while they're being recorded. Their cell phones in front of their face. You would think that, okay, we're being watched. This guy's
those cops that you're saying that are next to him seeing that, they're not in positions of power. They can't fire that cop.
Yeah, but they're in positions of responsibility. Is the thing. And power is responsibility within that context.
Okay.
Let me give you.
What are they supposed to do though? If that cop sees that other guy do something, okay, I agree with you.
I know you do. But
we're talking about what about innocent cops though that witness these things?
But I agree with you, John, and what you're saying. But I do agree with you, Prime, that I do think, despite what John's saying, and there's probably truth to that, certainly the human nature of I'm friends with this person, I work with them, I don't want them to get in trouble. Should they be doing that? Absolutely not. And I'll just give you just a quick anecdotal situation. I was a debater in university. It is the left of the left, like very left wing. They really, really care about things like women's rights. They cared about the Me Too movement and things like that. I knew good people in there that told me they straight up knew people knew people that had literally committed rapes in positions of power in academia, but they didn't want to speak up because they were afraid of losing their jobs. And these are people. I agree with you, Prime. We need to get to those aren't callous people that were like, I don't care that woman got assaulted. You know, so we need to find out how to get.
I'll just say this. I promise I'll let you in. We also have to have the situation where, you know, we see with the cell phone camera, right? This cop did this thing, like he performed this practice, like putting his knee on a guy's neck, and the guy died, right? But he did it while he's being recorded, right? How many times when there weren't cell phone cameras did that exact thing happen?
I
right?
agree.
Did you guys know that the same thing happened not very long ago to a white guy? They knelt on his neck and he killed him. Did y'all know
Tony
that?
Timpa.
Yeah.
Why did the news? Now, let me ask you. Why did the news not cover that?
And like we said previously, sorry, yes,
What?
it's not sensational what he said.
Exactly.
It's not sensational. I agree with you.
Yeah. So can we all agree that media is biased as hell and it does want to keep us divided?
Yeah. What about white people, guys? Am I right? The real victims of like police brutality.
Oh, I love when you come in MindWaves when it's towards white people. How does that white guilt taste, by the way?
Yeah,
because you promote true equality.
It tastes great, dude. Being able to recognize that Black Lives Matters without having to inject my whiteness into it feels amazing. Maybe you should try it for once in your fucking life, dude.
I love the
Jesus
fact that
Christ.
you just took a situation that was geared towards the divisiveness of press and you made it about
No,
white
John,
versus
you're
black.
right. Let's
You
keep talking
showed
about white
exactly
issues, dude.
what's
Come on,
in
let's
your
talk about
head,
how we're
bro.
prosecuted for not being able to dance and shit like that, right? Like it's the real issues.
You brought that up. I love the fact that you sit there in your liberal mindset and it comes back to this white guilt. Nobody said a word about that, but you interjected it because you are so biased.
John,
Tell me,
didn't
how do you
ask,
wake
don't
up in the
care,
morning
plus
and
you're
look at
white,
yourself
boy.
in
All
the
right.
mirror?
You acting
I'm a
goofy
white
as fuck,
one.
dude.
Wow,
Look
that's
at you right now.
Listen.
Oh my God! A white
Hey,
guy
okay,
was
okay.
murdered at the hands of the cops that
Everybody
you said are
shut down.
militaristic, and now suddenly
Everybody-
it's a horrible thing. You have danced around this thing like a fucking ballet dancer. We can't even have a rational discussion.
How can he? He's white. He's bad at dancing.
Look at that white fragility, guys. It's pouring out of his pores, dude. It's just he's sweating. Holy
have an intellectual discussion without this liberal agenda.
Okay, I server muted both of them, so nobody can hear what they're saying. But,
Sorry.
So
Can I respond to Prime?
wait. I've server muted, but I have no clue what John's saying. I think he's saying it to his own audience. But I will say this: MindWaves committed the worst crime that he just committed is that he did a Destiny meme on my panel, and that is an unforgivable sin. A Destiny meme on my panel? How dare you? But. Okay, I'm going to pass it to John, then I'm going to pass it back to MindWaves, and after, I'm going to throw it to Brento, because these two obviously want to go at it a little bit. I couldn't hear shit because they were both yelling.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I've unmuted both of you. I just couldn't hear anything because it was, it's, you know.
Utter
Okay.
chaos.
John, I'm throwing it to you first, then I'm going to throw it back to MindWaves, then I'm going to throw it to Brento, okay?
I just like the fact that the point that I was trying to make before MindWaves interjected that completely just ridiculous comparison that was intellectually dishonest. It was actually provoking, is all it was my point was that a white dude at the hands of the crooked cops that we were literally just talking about, that Prime was literally just talking about. And my point was the media didn't cover it because it wasn't divisive, because the media wants people divided. It had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that, oh, white people have it bad too. That wasn't even the point, but you felt the need to interject that because that's how your mind thinks. So before you start making these random accusations and wanting to have open discussions, stop making assumptions based upon what you perceive to be what you're hearing. That's not what I said whatsoever. And we can go back and actually listen to that tape, or we can go back and listen to it. I not once said that. And I reject the notion that I'm going to sit here and say that, oh, white people have it worse. That's not what I'm saying. It's a tyranny from behind the badge that I have an issue with, and it's the press trying to keep people divided based upon partisanship, political issues. That's my point.
Okay, MindWaves?
Yeah, I think it's fair to point out that, like, you know, the media probably doesn't pay attention to it because there's not enough of a, like, it's not sexy enough to, like, report on, right? Like these sorts of, like, mishaps.
So then you agree with what I said? Did you agree with what I said?
These sorts of mishaps happen all the fucking time at the hands of police officers, right? The reason that the the reason why George Floyd and his death sparked so much outrage and protests across the nation is because this was a time of unrest, and this was another killing of another black man at the hands of police officers. This is a long line of black men being killed by police officers, right? And there's a movement behind it, Black Lives Matters, right? So yeah, that does make it more press worthy. That does make it, like, I guess, worth reporting on for these media companies. But for that reason, it is also worth like paying attention to, right? Like I wasn't trying to accuse you of bringing it up as like, hey, let's like.
That's exactly.
Yes, I was being facetious, right? Like I don't think you were bringing it up to say, hey, what about white people? Right?
Okay.
I don't think you were bringing it up to say, what about white people? But the problem is that when somebody like Rob did it earlier, that's exactly what he did.
So then you just associated me with him.
No, but the problem is that that man's death only ever gets brought up in comparison with George Floyd now.
Okay,
why? Because white people keep on wanting to compare the deaths of like white people to black people at the hands of cops, and I'm really tired of it. I just like we don't need to compare these.
Okay,
two.
Rob, I'll give it to you. But Brento's been waiting for so long.
Would you at least acknowledge that's not what I did? Would you at least acknowledge that's not what I did?
Well, I don't know your full intentions. I'm not going to pretend to know.
I literally just laid it out. Will you at least acknowledge what I?
Sure. If that's true. Like I agree that of course the media didn't report on it because it's not a sexy story, right? Which is unfortunate. Yeah, a man died.
Okay, we're throwing it over to Brento, then to Rob. Okay, Brento.
Man was killed.
Thank you. I'm just gonna say again to reiterate. I think like for everything everyone has brought up across this entire debate. It comes down to police accountability and the fact that this seemed like another murder, another instance in which was going to be excused away or was going to say, well, there was probable cause, or well, they had this or this and the officer did this, but it was on camera and it was undeniable and it's 8.5 minutes. And it's the fact that people feel like when these things happen, nothing is going to happen to the police officers. There's not going to be justice for the victims, right? And it's like if police officers were held to account in this kind of case for killing this innocent man who in no way should not be dead. Nothing that happened in the case of George Floyd should have resulted in death, and but he's dead now. And so it's like, okay, people understand. They've seen this so many times. And it's like, unless something occurs, unless there's these protests, unless there's this outrage, nothing is going to change. If there was justice, then there wouldn't be this kind of outrage for all of the calls for systemic change, for policing change, police change in this community. It's like if police officers were held to account in this case where it's so cut and dry, then it wouldn't be a problem.
Okay, Rob?
I agree with that. I just wanted to respond to MindWaves. Your apology to John is not truthful and not honest and in good faith. If you're going to blame me, who did the exact same thing, my entire message, this entire debate is that the way to be able to solve this is to look and see that there are problems with police brutality.
No, your entire solution is, hey, let's ignore race. Let's ignore race.
MindWaves. To be fair,
MindWaves. Come on, let's let him say first. You can respond after.
All right, whatever.
And so the entire time I was saying we can't get to the root cause of the problem because people in positions of power are intentionally dividing us, which is why the mainstream media is pushing one sensation. It's the exact same reason that the media, and we used to all agree with this trope, if a young black girl was kidnapped, the media doesn't care. But if a young white girl is kidnapped, all of a sudden it's a big sensational story. And my point is the media is pushing this sensationalism, as are our politicians, because they know when they're driving a wedge. If I stood up here and you were on a panel and we were talking about the death of Tony Timpa, and I stood up and I said, the reason that Tony Timpa died is because of racism, because these cops hate white people. And you said, wait, what? What about George Floyd that died? That wouldn't be proof
Rob.
that you were like, I only care about black people. That would be you making the reasonable point. Well, wait a minute. Yes, there is a problem. It's not just about attacking white people. It's about
but the problem is that I agree, but the problem is that every time we try to tell you that race and class and all these other different factors intersect, you say, well, no, like why are we being so divisive? Why are we being so in your words like tribalistic, right? This isn't about race. This is about police brutality, right? And the problem is that you're not seeing where they intersect or how they overlap at all, right?
Okay. Can I just real quick? That's a reasonable take. I disagree with that take, but that's far different than saying, oh, you only care about white people dying, right? You're saying, I disagree with your interpretation. That's fine. I have no problem with you saying that. But the fact that I think that honestly, your accusation that somehow me bringing that up means I only care about certain racial things, I think that speaks to maybe what's really in your heart. That you say, oh, if someone talks about this division, then clearly they only care about white people. That's not true.
Rob, can I interject? Look, I get mind. Look, I get you. Because for years now, you're right. You're right. For years, you've seen the right do exactly what you thought I was doing. So I don't blame you. I actually don't blame you. So my thing is, that's not what I was doing. I don't think that's what Rob was doing. So I think it's unfair to essentially make the assumption that that's how we're going to be tonight. I think it's, again, you're making assumptions. But I understand where you're coming from, because based upon a stereotype of what you experienced in the past, that's what you're going to go off of, which is,
I bring it up?
Well, no, I'm not. I'm not basing this off a stereotype at all. I'm actually like inductively reasoning based off of Rob's own words. Every time that he talks about this issue, he makes it very clear that he's not at all concerned about race or racism and how they are related to these issues of police brutality.
But that doesn't prove that. But that's me disagreeing with the root cause of this and the best way to solve it. That doesn't prove that I somehow have racial animus. The problem is that nobody's saying that this is like the root cause or like the main problem, or like we need to tackle racism before we tackle police brutality. We're saying that like, hey, it seems like in a lot of ways police brutality and racism intersects and compounds on each other to affect the Black community specifically in disproportionate ways, right? The argument
every time we bring up how disproportionately Black people are affected, or how cops are often racist, or police in ways that end up reinforcing systems of institutionalized racism, you keep on saying, well, why are you being so divisive, right? Why are we being tribalistic? Why are we talking about race when the real issue is just police officers and a number of other socioeconomic factors that you listed off? And then you also go as far as to say that look at how much crime Black people commit as well, and it's just like,
it's so ridiculous. Dude. This is like when Eric Holder said this country's too cowardly to have a conversation about race. What he means is you have to agree with me or you're racist. You have to agree with me or you're arguing in good faith. And that's ridiculous. No. Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. I'm being accused of, because I say, look, there's division being called, because I think we should be focusing on this at a bit broader level, that it's about police brutality, it's about systemic poverty, it's about class warfare. It's
saying a broader level, it would be one thing, but you're saying let's stop having this conversation about the Black community and let's just talk about cops.
That's not what I'm saying.
That's not at all what he said.
Community. I'm saying that if we just focus, if we say, oh, this is somehow all, literally, I thought everyone on this, not everyone, I don't want to overgeneralize. I thought many people on this panel, and certainly many of the protesters that I've heard, even the great legitimate ones, they talk about the problem is systemic racism. Charlemagne the God said the problem is we need to dismantle systemic racism. I'm saying that when we overgeneralize like that, and we say, well, if more Black people are affected, that proves racism, I don't think that leaves us to the real solutions. So now, you might disagree with me, and that's fine. But I don't see how that's somehow right that I'm arguing in bad faith.
I love the stereotyping. I
think when Eric Holder says that our country is afraid to deal with racism, I think it's true, and that not saying that you have to agree with them or else you're racist. No, I think they're understanding that it's simple of denial of the problem, right? When we have and then during that time where you have a media and political apparatus that completely try to delegitimize a black president, say that he wasn't born here, and he wasn't of the faith that he claimed to be, right? And in any way try to delegitimize him, that was a problem, right? I think it's referring to the fact that we have all these issues, for instance, like police violence, and you'll have people saying that no, race has nothing to do with it, right? Or not understanding the coming to grips with the full scope, the full impact of slavery, Jim Crow, and then continuing bigotry through our different institutions. So it's not like no one's saying that like if you don't agree with us, you're racist, right? We're saying that there's a set of issues, there's a set of practices that are ingrained within our country. Let's deal with them. You may have different solutions. You may look at it a different way, but no one's saying that because of that, you're necessarily racist. I think that's a complete straw man.
No, I'm not saying he said we are racist. I'm saying that he said if we don't agree with certain presuppositions, then we're too cowardly. And I think you just proved my point because you made a lot of claims in there. It's like, well, this proves racism. It proves systemic racism. But if someone disagrees with that, that doesn't mean they're too cowardly to have a conversation about race. They just they're looking at it way differently. You may disagree, but that doesn't mean that they're cowardly or they're
the problem is that
race.
sometimes, Rob, it seems like people purposely try to avoid that conversation or obfuscate it out of the conversation.
But did he?
Some people might. We don't.
Did he?
Constantly.
I didn't hear it.
No, I'm on here to talk about race. Like I've talked about it the whole time.
Rob, I'm not gonna accuse you of anything, but I'm gonna say like when people are trying to talk about race, you are trying to say like, hey, there are other issues, or there are bigger issues, and then.
But what about men?
Like it's about you're equivocating, and that seems to take it away from specific.
It's not just that. Are you talking about the whole reason behind why I brought up stereotyping, though?
No, he's not stereotyping. He's not.
Are you talking about the reason why he brought that up to begin with?
I'm saying simply bringing up another issue while discussing an issue obfuscates the issue.
That's ridiculous. That would be like me saying, oh, the issue is black men murdering people. I only want to talk about black men murdering people. And you say, wait a minute, it's not because they're black, it's because of poverty. And I say, you're obfuscating the issue. It's about black. Why don't you want to talk about black men?
Well,
you would say, no. It's because
that's not even the issue.
No, it would be because at that point,
example, by the way,
the issue because it's causality for why they're doing so. We're not talking about that. The reason why this cop murdered George Floyd was because of racism. As said earlier, it inevitably leads to people having this discussion of disproportionate racism within our system of justice.
Hold on. Dylan, I'm not sure if we're going to actually do it, but the agenda you gave us said that we have a section for solutions.
Yes, the third one with solutions is just I saw the conversation naturally transform like towards that, and then it just kind of diverted. So that's why I didn't interrupt to like put it that way.
Okay, so I just want. Okay, why don't you respond, and then I want to talk about some solutions. So go ahead.
Okay, and that's what I'm saying. I'm like when VoiceBox says the causal relation. That's what I'm saying. We've identified a problem. The police have these interactions per capita more with the black community. Why is that? There could be tons of reasons, but even VoiceBox, he says right there, he gives the reason. It's racism, and I'm saying no. I think that the solutions are being avoided or not being seen because we're allowing people to just say, oh, we see the data, cops per capita kill more black people, therefore racism. And if we aren't honest, if we don't look at the underlying data, why are the factors that lead to that? We can't get to real solutions. And then to be accused of, well, that I'm somehow only wanting to talk about white people or obfuscating, that's not true. You might disagree with me, but just like VoiceBox, you said, well, that would be, if we were discussing murders from black men, we would be discussing the causal reason for that. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm saying, what is the causal reason that we see police having these interactions? I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but I could be wrong. But I think it's unfair to say I'm obfuscating.
I came in late to this whole debate thing, but I have to agree with Rob. I didn't see him trying to say, oh, it's not because I saw him trying to follow the rabbit hole, saying, let's go deeper and explore as to other options beyond just the superficial. That's all I saw him doing.
A couple times Rob brought up specifically hey, talking about racism in this context is just dividing things, which is clearly saying let's not talk about racism here, right?
No, that's
So hold on. Can I
Please.
Can we talk about solutions here? So I came up with a few things here. One is that qualified immunity thing that I brought up previously, and that basically cops can't be prosecuted for a specific for actions unless it was specifically previously adjudicated that was wrong. That allows cops to have the get out of jail free card for lots of actions that otherwise, if they weren't cops, it wouldn't be allowed. So things like that would help with accountability. Another thing is demilitarization of police. The tours of duty thing that I mentioned previously. A national database of political criminal offenses by police officers. So we've seen situations in which a police officer has been in one jurisdiction, been fired for a use of force, right? And then goes to another jurisdiction and gets hired there. We need a national database that can coalesce all these things and say, like, this officer is blacklisted because of committing some sort of egregious offense. So that's one thing. You say it already exists. I'm not aware of that. And later on, please let us know about that if I'm mistaken.
No, you're good. It's a great idea, but it already exists.
Okay. Well, if it does exist, it doesn't seem like it's being used because I've seen cops still get hired. Another idea: automatic Justice Department triggers. Okay. So, and I got this from the majority report. If there is a certain number of complaints leveled against a police jurisdiction, right? That the Justice Department maybe steps in, like at 10 complaints, just for an example, at 10 complaints, it steps in and says, what are you guys doing? Let's see your records. What are your practices in? If the complaints escalate, then maybe we put in a Justice Department person to watch the police, that police department, escalating levels of intervention based on the record of that jurisdiction. So that this is automatic. So no one's. So it doesn't matter if a Democrat or a Republican is in office, right? These are automatic triggers that kick into place so that if there are bad police departments, we can intervene. Another solution, and I won't take up everyone's time, is enact a national standards for police use of force, right? So officers in different jurisdictions are being told different things, right? As to how they should operate. Why don't we have national standards that everyone can agree on? And this is what we teach our officers. This is how we react in this specific situations. And then when they step outside that those parameters, we can take action. And when they're within those parameters, they are safe.
Because every state's laws are different.
He's saying it shouldn't be that way.
Federal.
I can't agree with that though. Notion is great. I understand that, but now we're talking about federal overreach versus states' rights.
Well, no, you said you were on board with federal oversight not too long ago, and then now when he proposes,
no, hold on, give me an example. Give me an example.
When he's talking about federal oversight, you say no, that's too much.
Yeah, well, give me the example where I said federal oversight, because you're making a lot of claims tonight and you're not backing up. Where did I say federal oversight? Give me the specific situation.
Blacklist.
Examples, please.
Wait, I could have swore you agreed earlier that like federal oversight or the lack of is what leads
that's
to
two different
police
things. That's two different things. Lack thereof or promoting more big government. Give me which one. Give me an example.
Well, if you're saying that there's not enough, then he's proposing more, and you're saying it's not enough.
No, I didn't say that at all. I said
there's not enough. It applies a lack, and
I said there is difference in federal oversight versus state law. So you can't sit there and say this is how it has to be in regards to how police are to manage certain things when state law is different. Now, if you're wanting federal oversight to come in and say this is how it has to be across the board, you've just violated state right, and therefore I disagree with that. So I still want to hit you back. Give me. I know this is the mind waves. Give me the example of where I said I am for federal oversight, big government. I need the example. You're making these accusations.
I'm not going to mince words with you here, but yeah, I think
don't make accusations. Don't make accusations.
No, it's very clear to everybody here that you were complaining about a lack of federal oversight.
No, you're not giving me an example though. You're not giving me an example. You keep making.
What do you want me to do? Find you the fucking clip?
Well, then if you don't
an
know
example
what
of
you're
what,
about, sir, if you're just going to make basic fucking accusations, at least give me examples because that's all you've done with me tonight. I don't know. It's because you just don't like me, but I think it's very dishonest of you.
I have not done that to you, not one time. And you and I don't agree. I can see that right now. But you continuously keep trying
John,
to...
then answer me, please. Do you think that like some federal oversight is required?
Give me the example. Give me the example.
What?
Where you said that I said I want a lot of federal oversight. Give me the example.
No, I'm asking you, John. I'm asking you right now.
No, now you're deflecting away from the point. Give me the example.
So you want me to play a gotcha? You want me to say, oh, well, because you said this in the past, now you're not. You want me to?
Yes.
Do that.
If you're going to make that accusation, have the actual data and the example to back it up, please. Otherwise, you're just pulling things out of. Do you
want me to like pull my chat, or do you want me to like go look for the clip, or
yes,
it's so stupid to even have this conversation.
Please. No, it's not.
I'm much more interested. Because I'm much more interested in what you actually believe. I was pointing out what seemed like
sidebarring. Stop.
I was pointing out what seemed to be a contradiction in your own words. It seemed to me that at some point in the conversation, you expressed a need for more federal oversight of police officers. When Prime goes ahead and suggests something.
I said community, sir. I said community at the very beginning of this conversation. Never did I say federal. I said community.
Okay. So you don't think that like we should standardize any sort of like policing or any sort of like federal standards for policing in the United States at all?
No, you can't, because then you violate state law. Now all states have to have the same laws. I can't agree with that, because now you basically invalidated the whole reason behind we vote. Why should we vote elected leaders to say we want this state to go this way, we want this state to go the other way, versus, hey, federal law says this is how they're all going to be. What's the point of a constitution? What's the point of law?
The federal government doesn't like. I'm not talking about solutions where like the federal government steps in and literally like micromanages each like aspect of the police department.
But the example that Prime gave is what I'm responding to. When he talked about there needs to be standards across for all police forces, it doesn't work that way.
And this is why. Why wouldn't it? Should, obviously.
Because not all states have the same laws.
Yeah,
they should.
Other states need
to. They shouldn't, because then now you've basically said there's no point in having freaking a constitution. There's no point.
Hold on. We have federal regulations for all kinds of things like national standards.
Doesn't make it right though.
Should states have the right to like enslave people?
Okay, look, that's the difference that
wow, that's such an extreme example. You've been doing that all night.
Okay, so
should a state not have the right to say, hey, based upon who we vote into office, we want more gun control or we want less?
We have a difference of opinion and federalism. Okay, that's a completely different conversation. I acknowledge, John, that you don't like that particular solution. But yeah, that's all I was saying. That in my opinion,
nothing against you, Prime. Nothing against you, sir. And I respect the fact that you're bringing solutions. To, hey, bro, respect. Seriously, I'm just saying this is why, number one, there is a database for why cops that do. If you get fired from a police department, you're done. Now, I know you said you know some people, so it's not always the case. But then the other part of it is when we talk about more federal oversight to where every state must be the same in regards to law, I can't agree with that.
So just for example, the cop that killed Tamir Rice, years ago, kid, 11-year-old in the park playing for toy gun. Cop ran up on him in a police car and immediately gunned him down. That cop had been identified as a person who should not have a gun by the police, who should not have a badge, but he went to another jurisdiction and then was hired there. And then I believe after that, because I don't think he was prosecuted, I think he went to a third jurisdiction after that. So if you're saying there's a database, I believe you if you're saying that's the case, and then it's not being used.
Doesn't mean it's effective. Yeah, I agree. There's a difference in existence versus it being effective. And so, yeah, I agree with you there.
Prime.
And another example.
Gentlemen, I got to bounce. I got to go. I'm going to go have some dinner with my wife.
No problem, John. Thanks for coming on.
I appreciate Dylan.
John,
Thank you for the invitation.
No problem,
John.
Wait. Let John compliment me on my own stream. Thank you. Go ahead, John.
Appreciate you inviting me. It's the first time coming on here. Thank you very much for having me and allowing me to take part in this discussion/debate. I apologize for my lashing out. I normally don't do that, but I just don't like intellectual dishonesty and baseless accusations. I feel it's very dishonest to have a very productive debate. I try not to do it. I don't like it when people do it to me, especially stereotype me. But I also understand where that comes from because I used to be that way. And then
so
when you're constantly exposed, say again.
So you can't
just a real with a question, real quick. John,
I didn't say that. I didn't say
John,
that.
do you mind? do you mind, or does anyone else mind here? All of us getting each other's contact info, just if we want to continue. I just wanted to ask.
Everybody here, I want to have on again in the future. Everybody here has been really productive to the creation of the show. I really like everybody here.
Yeah, I like to collaborate with you in the future, John. If that's a possibility.
Absolutely, love that.
Look
Actually,
at
I have
Dylan
Saturday.
Swerve to pretend like he likes all of you.
All my best friend. Look, every single one of you, I'll name a child after you. I swear.
Thank you.
Damn,
I appreciate it. But sincerely, thank you to everybody. Thank you to everybody for having me
See you,
here
John.
and for the great
Hey, John,
conversations.
good seeing
I
you.
appreciate it. Y'all have a good
No
night,
problem.
guys.
See you later.
Good talking, John.
Prime, can I ask you a question? What do you think about this as a potential solution? I think we all agree body cams are important because you're absolutely right. What if we had police stations start to mandate 2 body cams per officer? Because how many times are we going to go through the crap of, oh, I'm sorry, my body cam malfunctioned? So, I mean, it wouldn't be a perfect solution, but I think at least you could really, really at that point say, come on, dude, 2 body cams. So that's something that I always thought about, like this idea, oh, there was a malfunction that somehow
There just needs to be more regulations surrounding body cams, right? Like you shouldn't be able to turn it off and on when you want to, on
I
whim. It should probably be live streamed to a server, which is then stored and then can be looked at if there's ever a file reported, etc.
And please don't have access to that server at all. That goes directly to like,
that'd be nice.
exactly,
Yeah.
by a third party. Yeah.
So
they'll need
sure,
great-
body cameras fine. However, I want to make the point that body cameras, as you admitted, aren't enough. We see during these protests, police are aware they're being filmed, and they're doing what they're doing anyway. Like we've seen them attack news cameras, right? News teams while they're actively filming, right? So video taping isn't enough. The problem is accountability, knowing that if I do take these actions, there will be consequences. That's the heart of the problem, in my opinion.
Yeah,
now, I'm my hand like
well
a
said,
politician.
I wanted to add another example to what you said, Prime, in the case of the police being rehired. Not just in the case of the cop that killed Tamir Rice. Fuck that guy already. But then you also have Philip Brailsford, the cop that killed Daniel Shaver in the hallway of the Arizona hotel. He got rehired just so they could give this fucker lifetime pension.
Yep.
So that's
outrageous.
our tax dollars going towards this guy's fucking salary forever until he's dead. It's truly fucking ridiculous.
I agree 100%. And that's exact, like Prime, you hit the nail on the head, I think. The problem is you could have all the policies you want. If they're never enforced with accountability, this crap's going to happen over and over. And look, I'm disagreeing with the idea that I think that these riots started all the time because of police. But you show me an example of a police officer acting out, and that police officer should be brought to charges to the fullest extent. So I think at least we can have agreement on that, even if we disagree with the bigger issue. And until we start to see the bad officers actually get charged, and it doesn't matter what we say, they're going to keep doing this. So I'm with you 100% on that. I absolutely am.
Yeah, there's another instance. So earlier too, you mentioned Tony, the man who was murdered by cops, and he was white, and it wasn't a sensational story. There's another person that I didn't see any universal coverage of, and this is Manuel Ellis, Tacoma man who was shot and killed. Or I'm sorry, not shot and killed, but he was murdered at the hand of cops. He's black, and that didn't seem to get national coverage until just today or yesterday, because of the fact that the Tacoma mayor finally decided, after 3 months of this man being murdered, oh, actually, let's go ahead and arrest the cops that did that. Why? Because of the protests going on currently, and they're like, oh shit, we actually have to be accountable for what we're doing.
But
So,
I think
Rob,
that,
can I ask you a question?
and that's not, I hope again, although I might disagree with the idea of systemic racism that people are protesting, I fully support everyone out there peacefully protest. Every single person not only has the right to protest peacefully whatever they want, but they're, in my opinion, absolutely right to be outraged over the murder of George Floyd. And I would stand with them any day and peacefully protest over that. I think that what you're saying, hopefully that maybe the protest did have a great effect of getting that case solved. I hope that's the case. But I will say this, that also proves that these stories could be selectively pushed, even if it's not just cross-racial or cross-gender. Like, it could be they pick and people in power pick and choose when to push these stories. And again, we're talking about this issue. Every single life lost that's been murdered by police is worth talking about, period. I don't care what the statistics behind that person was, but we have to look at this in proportion. Our country's burning, and last year we had 9 unarmed Black people killed. And I think the problem is that's way better than years we saw previously. So I don't know if the level of rage, not with the peaceful protesters, but the level of rage with the violence, if it's commiserate to what we actually see happening, and we're heading in the right directions. And I'm afraid it'll cause division and make it worse.
And do you believe all the rioters and the people breaking shit are just there because a Black guy was killed by a cop?
No.
Or do you actually believe it's a lot of people that are just wanting to fuck shit up? I'm not saying every protester is like that, and every person that is, you know, operating in the breaking shit is someone that is sitting there being like, all right, we're mad about this issue, or they're sitting there going, all right, we're just here to fuck shit up. But that's also a thing we have to look at.
So you're saying, are you arguing that the response has been disproportional to like what actually is going on, Rob?
The rioting, not the protest, but the rioting.
Oh,
Yes.
well, I'm talking about the protests. Like there, it seems like the rioting has mostly died down.
No, I think look, I would like to see protests nationwide every time a cop murders someone. So I don't think that's
Okay,
just
so we can recognize that the rioting is like a minority even of the presence of these protests, right? Like that, like what has come about as far as like rioting goes amounts to very little in the broader sense of these protests, right?
But that hardly, that's like saying, well, the majority of cops don't kill someone, so the majority of them are good, so no need to focus on
do you agree or not? Do you think it is the minority of like these instances? Like, do you think that the majority of these protests or like the result of like the majority result of these protests is rioting?
Probably not. There's been a lot, particularly in smaller towns, of protests that didn't break out. But again, like,
right. So most of these people are here for the protests and not the rioting, right? Like most people engaging in this stuff is engaging in the protests, not the rioting and looting.
I would say that's true, but let me just ask this question.
Okay, so then why are you saying that the response seems disproportional?
The response of the violence that's occurring, and there are, to answer Mustache Tom's point, there are a lot of people, if you ask. Yes, you have the people just stealing televisions, but there's a lot of people that are purposely attacking the police because they feel that that's warranted because of this situation. That's what I find is like lighting up a police precinct. That's disproportional.
When was the last time a peaceful protest accomplished shit in America?
When's the last time a violent one did?
You can argue that violent and peaceful was the civil rights.
Stonewall is
Malcolm
definitely
X.
a good example.
Yeah.
I mean, the Black Panthers and a lot of the civil rights movement was involving riots and.
Catherine has the dip, so I just want her to be able to shout out her channel quick.
Oh yeah, just KatherineDominates here at Twitch. Hit me up if you want to learn more about intersectionality, since it seems a few people are a little spotty on that. And I do emotes for commission if you ever need any.
Cool. It was good seeing you, Catherine.
I'd love to talk to you, Catherine. Thank you. Yeah, but again, like, let me ask you this then, just a hypothetical. Charlottesville, we saw a bunch of disgusting white supremacists, right? Yeah. We were told that if you're standing and marching with people engaged in that sort of violence, then you're basically signing on to that violence. That's what we said in Charlottesville.
Well, that's a lot different, though. White supremacists are there to literally say, X people do not deserve equality. X people don't deserve to breathe the same air we breathe.
Let's be honest as to what those protests were. That Charlottesville, that was specifically advertised as a white supremacist protest. I mean, that was the material that's I've seen the material.
But
so
look,
I mean, there are other protests, for instance, like the lockdown protest, which I brought previously, where white supremacists all happen to be there. But Charlottesville is a different thing. Just want to make that clear.
But let me say, that's what it ended up being. I don't know. Look, it's not my circles. the flyers I saw that was like unite the right, I could see being a reasonable person like, hey, I'm upset that these statues are being torn down. A protest with right-wing people, just because there were a lot of white supremacists on their channels and stuff saying, oh, well, by the way,
point. It was a recruitment tactic for the alt-right. They went there to recruit people.
Right?
Okay.
Jews will not replace us. Then as a random nice white person, I know I got to get the hell out of here. But a lot of them didn't. So
I agree, but by the same token, then if we could say that, if you're standing somewhere and all of a sudden you see 50 people start beating a shop owner and rioting and breaking windows, at that point, who could you say there? It's like, well, those are peaceful protests that are watching the rioters. If we're going to say in one group, you can't stand with people doing heinous stuff or else you're co-signing off to it, why can we just all of a sudden say, well, everyone that was around with the rioting, most of them were probably peaceful. If you're standing in a riot while it's going,
we've seen a lot of people in the protests that were not rioting pull rioters off. We have seen videos of people spray painting buildings saying Black Lives Matter that were not part of that protest.
Right.
And the protesters
they are
going
engaging in the behavior you're asking them
out.
to right now. Like yeah, a lot of these protests are like when they see people incite these sorts of violence, when they see them try to like loot and stuff like that, they try to remove these people. They try to call them out when they see it. A lot of the organization is like, hey, if you guys see people inciting violence, you know who's going to be on the receiving end of the violence in response to that. It's going to be Black people. You need to make it very clear to the people protesting that this isn't okay behavior to engage in, right? So they're doing exactly what you're wanting them to, but it seems like it's not enough, or
but listen,
you want something more.
I agree with you 100%. And almost 90% of the time I've seen that happening, guess what? The riots didn't break out. But what about the times we see the riots occurring? I haven't seen a lot of footage of in the middle of like some of these really bad riots of a bunch of people saying, stop that, stop rioting. Probably because they left because they were like, I don't want to be part of this. But again, then we could see there are a lot. My only point is there are a lot of people rioting. I'm not saying the majority of people that are upset about George Floyd or that went out to protest are rioters. I'm not saying that. But there are a large amount of people that are.
Okay, so what do we do about it?
Really call it large.
And
like 28 cities
amount
with significant riots, I would call that large.
I would not call the protest to rioters like per capita large.
Well, Dom, can I put it this way? Wait, can I answer? Yeah. It's like there were riots, not all. Okay, I could qualify it till everyone's happy, but you know what I mean. Right. There were riots in Seattle, and then there were riots the next day. And then there were riots the next day and looting. And then someone was like, well, there's going to be riots the fourth day. And it's like, really? Are we actually going to have people breaking down like glass and businesses and rioting and looting out of people 4 fucking days in a row? Like, that's the kind of question. It's like, really? Or is this the new normal? Fuck that meme. But like, really, can we not stop something like that? That's kind of what people mean when there's like rioting or something. It's like,
right?
Or is this what we're standing for now? Is this like something that we just expect and we accept?
I may have misunderstood Rob. What I was saying, what I was thinking he was saying was like, if this is all the protesters and rioters in a circle, he was saying that a lot of the rioters were like this. There was a very, very high amount of rioters compared to protesters. And for me, I have not seen anything like that. So that's what I may have just been misunderstanding you.
I'm saying it like this. In the same token that we could say it is not a defense of the people that are upset about the murder of George Floyd to say, hey, most cops don't murder people. You would say, yes, but the minority that do, it's such a heinous action that it requires focus. The same with these rioters. I don't know what the percentage is. I'm guessing it's not even 5%. I'm guessing vast majority of people peacefully protesting or the protesting are doing so peacefully. But that 5% are causing real damage. And over 16 people have been killed. I mean, it's something that we need to be honest about and to just say, I think it's a mistake personally to say, well, everyone would have been peaceful. It's all the cops' fault. And I think you're right, Dom, to say some of these people, they don't even care about the issue. It's just an excuse to go damage stuff, to go steal stuff, to go beat people. And I don't think they would have not done that if the cops hadn't been shooting tear gas. I think they would have found an excuse one way or the other in the context of there were a bunch of people justifying politically violence against police in this situation.
But Rob, the problem is that I agree with you that the like rioting and looting and all that stuff happening is bad. Probably doesn't help the movement too much, right? Especially when this isn't like the rioting isn't like maybe a direct response to the police officers. I think that there's probably more justified instances of rioting when it's like a direct response against like a police officer or precinct that has been taking action against you or something like that. But the problem is that when we're having conversations about this movement, about the protests in general, and we're saying like, hey, yeah, we do stand with the protesters and we stand with their message and this is why, et cetera, but all you do is you sit here and go, yeah, but like, look at this 5% of people that is ruining your protest because I keep pointing it out that these people are ruining it, right? Like all you're doing is shining like a giant magnifying glass on these looters that and rioters that we're telling you we don't agree with. And the like, I don't know what your proposed solution is to deal with these people. You're just shouting about, you're taking time away from acknowledging this movement and the protest to say, hey, this problem exists, but I'm not going to say how to fix it. Right?
Okay, one second, MindWaves, your mic is popping like a ton. It's crackling and stuff.
I can't hear it actually. It sounds fine to me.
I heard a little bit.
I heard a little bit.
Then I'm done.
Well, no, but I thought the discussion around the protests, I didn't think we were just here to be like, are the protests, does anyone disagree the protests are legitimate? Anyone? So what was the panel going to be? We all just sit here and go, yeah, the protests were legit.
Well,
I mean,
the
riots are a big issue. And again, I feel that it's just like the people, right? Like, I'm sorry, VoiceBoxTV. I'll give you a chance. I'm sorry. I don't mean to dominate. I just feel like I'm talking a lot because maybe I disagree more than other people. That's all. I appreciate it.
Chad is now requesting that we debate on whether MindWave's mic was popping, another topic. But no, VoiceBox.
No.
Yeah, no, but what Prime said is correct. It's not about arguing about riots. It's arguing about police reform and what are the proper solutions to this. Because we can even see that there's some discrepancies in what we'd like to see, or what we'd like to change in regards to our police. I'm glad that Prime brought up some actual solutions as well.
Me too.
I wanted to bring up a couple that were either lightly touched upon or weren't touched upon at all. So if you'll grant me a bit to just say a couple things about that or bring up solutions. For instance, end broken window policing, end for-profit policing and for-profit prisons, abolish those. What is it? Or at least limit use of force. Just in general, have retrained cops to either de-escalate properly, or at the very least limit the way they handle certain cases, so that way you don't have cops just shooting first, asking questions later, like it's an episode of fucking Hawaii 5-0 or NYPD Blue or something. It's like they over sensationalize the violence and really get into their heads that this is how they should behave when it's not.
But I think I'm with you. It all sounds good, but I think that we have to be fair about both sides of the equation. You can have all the training you want, but if you're sending police officers into cities where the violence is so incredibly high, no matter what, we could train better, we could do all that stuff, but we have to be honest about how it's a two-way situation. Now, having said that, are the police more responsible? Yes. We pay them and appoint them because they're supposed to be held to a higher standard. Completely agree. But we do have to be honest about how do we, what can we all be doing to suggest a de-escalation? And I only bring it up in this context because like some of these questions of like, we don't want super trigger happy cops. I think that Prime makes the good case about like PTSD, but I don't know if we could rotate people if it's possible in the way you suggest, Prime. And so we need law enforcement, and law enforcement's going to be in these really bad areas, and inevitably they're going to get worn down and mistakes. And I don't know how to solve it. I don't.
So I think it requires a holistic response, right? So we were talking specifically about police reforms, but you said, for instance, Rob, that they're going into these incredibly violent neighborhoods, right? So what can we do about those violent neighborhoods? We can, for instance, put investment in those violent neighborhoods. We can, in terms of education, in terms of businesses, and all kinds of ways we can invest in these neighborhoods. We can change the way we do our whole justice system looks at these people. We can change housing. For instance, we can dismantle the ghetto. That's one thing we can do. We can dismantle the ghetto, because the ghetto is enforced by our laws, by our real estate laws, by all kinds of institutions that keeps people in these situations, our housing regulations. It's
housing regulations.
Yes. To finish up, there's all kinds of ways that we can handle it. The problem is that police are the institution of last resort, right? If it's gotten to the point that police are involved, most likely there's been a series of failures up until that point, right? We can make it so that there are, for instance, just less criminals by giving those people opportunities. When crime is the only industry that's hiring in your neighborhood, well, that's the problem, right? So we can start in all kinds of ways to reduce the situation and maybe reduce the number of guns on the streets. You might disagree about that one, but there's all kinds of ways that we can make policing safer by making society safer, and then go from there.
I think that go ahead, voice.
And this is what I do. I want to know what you were talking about when it comes to housing.
It's a fair point. Yeah.
Specifically, when, for instance, redlining, when African Americans can't get loans or housing loans or mortgages because they live in a certain area, right? Now, redlining is illegal as it stands now, but when we know, for instance, during the housing crisis, right? And then 2008, that was happening because a bunch of bad mortgages collapsed at the same time.
Right.
There were banks, to something that Rob said previously, that specifically targeted African-American communities, right? They went to African-American churches and then said, well, if you want this American dream, here's to own a home, here's how you do it. You work with us, right? However, a lot of African-Americans were being forced into subprime loans, even though they qualified for prime loans, right? So it was a systematic failure on our system, and a malice intent, obviously, in our system.
Housing is completely different than it was in 2008.
Yes,
now, and they have to report multiple times a year of every time they fund a loan, where they are and which neighborhoods they are in. And they have to make sure they are not just only doing this little area. Like for me, I'm in the East Bay area. So basically the best way to put it, here's the Bay Area water. All around the coast of the water, San Francisco's on this side, Oakland's on this side, you have San Leandro, Hayward. You have Richmond up here. Very notoriously bad neighborhoods throughout all that area. And then you move over a little bit further into the land on your east side. You have your Walnut Creek, Concord, Pleasanton, Danville, Alamo. Those areas are completely different, super fucking wealthy. If a lender needs to operate in the Bay Area, they need to make sure that they just don't have only loans over in this rich area. They are required by law to make sure they also have stuff in Richmond, Hayward, San Leandro, or they have to close down.
Yeah, so I believe I haven't heard about those reforms, but I believe that they're in place. But when banks violate those reforms, there actually needs to be action in place. People need to go to jail because no one went to jail during the 2008 crisis for causing that. So that's another thing. And then there's more to it, right? For instance, public transit. We saw this in Baltimore during the Freddie Gray incident, which was pointed out, where the ghetto that was created there was made by the way public transit was laid out, and the way literally the highways were made out that cut off those communities from other communities. So it was so difficult for people in those poor communities to travel to where the jobs were. So I'm saying there's a holistic response to this that indicts every level of society that we need to take a look at, because the police, when we get to the point where the police are involved, there's been a whole series of failures. that happened previously.
I will say, as a Marylander, and this is, I don't like to comment a lot, but I do want to say this because this is close to my heart. As a Marylander, the lack of transit options in Baltimore is gross. And Larry Hogan, like specifically targeting transit options that were in Baltimore and crushing that after there was already funds allocated for that was gross to me, right? Transit is something that's definitely not talked about a lot when it comes to people being able to access jobs.
And one of the things is, though, where I think that maybe you'll agree with me, this is a problem, Prime, is most of these cities where this is occurring is ran by Democrats. I don't say this partisanly. I say it because I don't think you'll find most Democrats are like, oh, we don't want to try to help, ethnic community. We don't want to try to help non-white communities. I think that they pay lip service to that. But then what are they actually doing? And I think that that's one of the reasons that I think you'll find predatory lending was also going on in poor communities, in Hispanic neighborhoods, Asian neighborhoods, and all these neighborhoods. One of the reasons I'm talking about this division is, again, it disgusts me to the core to see Chase Bank getting off of what they've done to make this situation worse because they know they could just say, well, Black Lives Matter, and somehow that makes it all right.
I mean, Rob, like someone pointed out, I just want to say, like, it's almost impossible to point out not a Democrat, but a political party without making it partisan to a certain degree. Like, it's implicitly partisan, right?
Okay, that's true, but let me say it this way. I don't think that, at least publicly, people running these cities, whatever party they are saying, we don't care about the inner city. Most of them are saying, oh, we're getting elected because we're going to come in and we're going to put resources into the inner city. And then they don't. I don't care what political party it is. I'm just saying we let people get away with lip service, just like we'll hear police after this situation. They'll say, we're going to start really locking up corrupt police, and they won't.
So I think it actually goes back to that Eric Holder comment you made, right? As I was saying, there's failures on every level. You're right. Minneapolis, Democratic mayor, and I believe a democratically appointed police chief. And then Black Lives Matter started under a black president with a black attorney general with a black Homeland Security officer, right? So what I'm saying is it's this system of white supremacy, because we're going to bring that back in, hits us on every single level. The entire system's indicted, and we need to have a conversation, which is to Eric Holder's point, about actually dealing with that, understanding that yes, there's interlocking systems that make these things very difficult to tackle. So if you're saying that a mayor gets hired or elected, right, and then he doesn't solve it, right? Yes, there's been a series of black mayors who've been in these cities, and they haven't been able to solve it, right? But what are the resources they even had, right? So let's assume, for instance, that they're operating in good faith. What are the resources that a mayor can bring to bear on these problems? Like, for instance, that public transportation system that I brought up previously. How can a mayor change that? But it's an entire indictment from the system top to bottom, and we need to have that conversation. We need to admit that, right? Because that's where people are being cowardly about. They don't admit that the entire system should be indicted, and then from there, then we can tackle. Then we can actually put real money, real dollars behind all of these solutions.
Again, I don't agree that it's. Go ahead, VoiceBox. I'm sorry. Please.
It's okay. I want to paint a picture for you because this is the cycle that we're seeing here. A young male will get arrested and sent to prison, and then more often than not, because of the lack of reform within our system, they're going to just bounce in and out. And during that time, they might have a child. During that time, that child is raised without a father. They end up having to go through a shitty education system that doesn't treat them fairly at all and gives up on them from the get-go. Their mother's working 2, maybe 3 jobs just to put food on the table for that child and their siblings. And then they grow up only knowing that the only way to get ahead is to go in these streets and do whatever they need to get ahead. They end up committing crime in order to try to get some cash together, petty crimes, burglary, break-ins, all sorts of stuff. Then what happens? They get arrested, and then the same thing happens over and over. It's a fucking vicious cycle because you have a community that is not bolstering the education and the well-being and welfare of these individuals, especially minorities. Then they are put in a position where they're compromised, where they have to, they feel like they have to continue in order to maintain a certain lifestyle or at least put food on the table. Then they get hit by the cops who are inadvertently constantly going into their neighborhoods and, profiling them to one extent or another. And then the cycle just continues on from there. That's what people are talking about when they see systemic racism, because every facet of the system has given up on them in some form or fashion. And it all stems from back when they were slaves, leading up to the freedom of slaves was still being treated shittily. You had Jim Crow era laws and so on and so forth. Black people couldn't vote. Black people weren't never treated fairly from the get-go. Then all the way leading up to the civil rights movement, where they got so many rights and things accomplished, but we still had this problem where the wealth disparity was so high, and then the education disparity was so high that nothing could really change effectively within those systems, especially when you had a gerrymandering that still suppressed the black vote, redlining that still prevented people from getting the funds they needed to get a good home in order. And then you had the racist war on drugs that disproportionately targets minorities, leading all the way up till now. So that's what we talk about when we have a systemic racial issue.
Are things getting better or worse? Are things better now in inner cities than they were right after the civil rights movement?
It depends how you really
It depends on the facet you're looking at.
Well, what's systemic racism?
Overall, let's say overall. Is that fair to question overall?
Right.
Overall, have things gotten better? Marginally, I would say.
Okay, so yes, but it doesn't mean that things aren't bad or that things are not unfair or that no one has any grievances.
Right.
It means we're making progress.
Right, but it's such an incremental progress to the point where people are still fed up because it's not enough, especially when you see a system where just in the last few months, especially with the way coronavirus worked, the top billionaires got $434 billion in the span of like 2 months. So when you see things like that and the wealth gap increasing and opportunities for these people getting shut out completely, of course they're going to look at this from the scope of it's affecting their race too, because it is.
But here's a question I want to ask then. I don't know how much time we have left here, but if things are getting better, I think a lot of people some people might disagree with that and say, like, when it comes to like incarceration rates and things like that in the inner city, or at least homicides in the past 10 years compared to what it was in past, whatever, I don't know. But here's my question. If it's Jim Crow and it's slavery that caused this, and if we started the civil rights movement and then we had what was called the war on poverty, the war on poverty started because I think people correctly realized that one of the big problems that was occurring in inner city neighborhoods was a lack of the pressures that were being put on there was driving families apart. And so Patrick Moynihan, who was a Democrat in 1962, commissioned a study called the Moynihan Report. And the report said that it was a national disgrace that 25% of Black children were born out of wedlock, basically in single parent households. And so we started the war on poverty, where we threw tons of money at these communities, and we had tons of programs for like housing programs. And there were people that would go door to door in the inner city saying, look, if you only have a single parent here, we have all this money for you. Today, the number in the Black community is 75% of Black children born out of wedlock. The number for whites is about 55%. And so it's gotten incredibly worse too. And so I understand the need. It's like, yes, we do need to address these problems, but they keep having these problems where it's like, we'll throw money at this problem and then just say that solves everything. And it makes it worse. And so my question is, at what point do we start to say, like, maybe the fact that we're focusing on this in this way, and what I would consider this divisive way, and we're encouraging what I would call this sort of grievance that we're separating people by race, it's actually making the situation worse. Instead, we need to have some real reforms with the groups at top and try to change the policies that we're doing, instead of just saying, oh, we need more housing. That's how I look at it. Why haven't things got better every time? It seems like every time we have one of these programs, things get worse.
Well, I can talk about housing real quick. California, for example, we have not hit a building quota in over 20 years for residential housing. And we have missed by almost 200,000 every year.
But are they? Is it because they're not putting money? Is it because they're not putting money in, or is it just being
regulations? Regulations with buildings, stuff like that. To put it this way, my area of the Bay Area, right now the housing is, for a cheap 2-bedroom house, you're looking to spend about $800,000.
Right, crazy.
You go down to like some bad parts of Oakland, you're still spending $350 to $450, depending on the houses. If you really want to have better housing, is number one, California specific needs to really kind of go down on their building regulations because now it's too expensive to build. On top of it, defund the police that are just not doing good shit for the neighborhood and put it into the schools. You get better schools in the inner city, you bring better education, it's going to bring up your housing value, and that allows the community to get higher tax revenue because their housing goes up.
Sure.
But
and
I don't think
builds better jobs. It will really help fix a lot of the issues. So, it's not going to fix all of it. It won't be overnight, but it's a damn good step forward.
Mm-hmm.
But Mustache Sean, maybe you know specifically about this. Let's just say over the past 10 years, in your area, has funding for housing gone down? Has it gone up?
It's went up, but you also have to think 10 years ago, we needed a lot more funding because the economy crashed.
Okay, but it's still gone up after that.
I mean, yeah, so basically right now, there's a lot of great programs. California specific, I'm just going to say that. For the sole reason I don't know every 50 states.
Sure.
But federally speaking, FHA loans, you need a minimum of a 580 credit score with 3.5% down. If you have less than a 580, you can put 10% down on a home for any 1 to 4 unit property. But you also have to qualify. You have county regulations. For my county right now, our 1 to 4 unit property can go up to $726,000. You also have mortgage credit certificates, which can bring, 20% of the interest you pay for your loan back as a full tax refund and credit. The problem is, I didn't learn this in a very nice, wealthy school. So I highly doubt inner city schools are learning this too. I had to go out and seek this knowledge and be in an industry.
No,
a lot of the reasons why
teach
we have a... Pardon?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, you're totally good.
Almost no schools teach finances in almost any way. It's one of the major deficits of schooling.
And what I'm saying is a lot of this. Does anybody here own a house?
No. Well, I don't.
Okay, so Rob, have you ever heard of a mortgage credit certificate?
No.
Well, how long have you owned for? Over 6 months?
What's that?
Have you owned for over 6 months?
Yeah, 1 year.
Okay, well, because your agent didn't tell you and your schooling didn't tell you, you now are not eligible ever again for a mortgage credit certificate, which means at the end of your taxes, every year, you get 20% of your interest paid back.
Wow.
Through your taxes.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. See, and that's what happens is when there's a lack of communication and a lack of education, people get fucked over. And now imagine what it's like to grow up in an inner city area where the government doesn't give a fuck about you, besides when it comes to a crime stat.
Well, I agree, but I think what I'm saying is it's not. We need to get rid of these people with the establishment, and I think, and you all agree with me, I get that, but I think that these problems also, maybe not as much, affect people in other communities as well, and they use the racial angle because they know it gins up such passion that what ends up happening is. You could have these people say, like in even the most liberal cities, and I don't mean that Democratic Party liberal, I mean liberal as if giving lip service to these communities. They talk a big game and then nothing gets done. But as long as they say, hey, we stand in solidarity, like the mayor of DC, as long as she spray paints Black Lives Matter today on the street, well, now everything's golden. And it's just not true. And sometimes what we see is when we like throw money at a problem and we don't manage it properly, it exacerbates the problem. So for example, if you live in California, a lot of the places, the homeless situation, they're throwing tons of money in. The more money they pour in, because they're managing it improperly, it makes the situation worse. And so I think that that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about needing real solutions. I'm proud to say that everyone on here, every single person on here has made me think about something as a potential solution. And so that's just where I'm coming from on the issue. But
like, no,
I don't want to shut down the conversation, but we have gone an hour over the usual schedule. It's supposed to be 3 hours. It's been 4 hours.
Fuck the schedule.
Yeah, fuck the schedule. I mean, even MindWaves.
Hey,